The polished Italian leather of James Richardson's shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights of First National's executive floor as he strode confidently toward the boardroom. The quarterly investment report, tucked under his arm, represented another record-breaking season, his season, and the whispers of his upcoming promotion to senior vice president swirled through the marble halls like the scent of expensive cologne. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, James had everything Cumberland Heights society deemed valuable. The penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the vintage wine collection, the meticulously tailored wardrobe, and most importantly, the reputation as Oakridge Valley's most eligible financial genius. What he didn't have was time for distractions, especially not ones with dirt under their fingernails and the scent of apple orchards clinging to sun-kissed skin. But that was before Emma Collins turned his perfectly balanced ledger of a life completely upside down. James Richardson wasn't born into wealth. He had methodically accumulated it, investment by careful investment, handshake by strategic handshake. The son of a middle management insurance salesman and a high school math teacher, he had clawed his way through merit scholarships and 16-hour workdays to become the youngest director of investment banking in First National's 100-year history. His carefully constructed persona left no room for error, no space for the unexpected. Victoria Richardson had raised her son to understand that appearances were currency, and James had leveraged that lesson into a fortune. "Jameson, darling," Victoria cooed over the phone one crisp autumn morning, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she reserved for public appearances and requests she expected to be fulfilled. "The Harvest Charity Gala is this weekend, and the Hayworth's daughter is back from her European tour. She asked about you specifically." James suppressed a sigh as he glanced at the stack of prospectuses awaiting his review. "Mother, I've told you before. I don't need you arranging my social calendar. I'm presenting the quarterly projections to the board on Monday, and I need the weekend to prepare." "All work and no play." Victoria's disappointment dripped through the line. "The Hayworths are legacy donors, James. My father would have understood the importance of being prepared." James cut her off, immediately regretting his sharp tone. 5 years since his father's heart attack, and the wound still felt raw. "I'm sorry, Mother. Perhaps next time." Victoria's silence stretched before she responded with practiced dignity. "The Riverview Farmers Market is hosting a preview booth for the gala vendors tomorrow. I've already arranged for Thomas Green to meet you there at 10. You can at least make an appearance and select the wine for the bank's donation table." James pinched the bridge of his nose. Thomas Green was the bank's president, his direct superior, and the man who would be deciding his promotion. "Fine, I'll be there." The call ended, and James returned to his spreadsheets, unaware that the farmers' market would offer something no algorithm could predict. Morning dew still clung to the grass at Riverview Park when James arrived, 15 minutes early, as was his custom. The farmers' market was just setting up, local vendors arranging produce and crafts with the casual efficiency of people who rose before dawn as a way of life. He felt distinctly out of place in his tailored weekend casual, a cashmere sweater and designer jeans that cost more than most of these vendors probably made in a week. Thomas Green was nowhere to be seen. James checked his watch and frowned. Being stood up was not part of his meticulously planned day. "You look lost," a voice called from behind a display of impossibly perfect apples. James turned to find a young woman watching him with undisguised amusement. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and freckles dusted a nose slightly reddened by the morning chill. Her jeans were worn at the knees, her flannel shirt rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and yet something about her direct gaze made James straighten his shoulders. "I'm waiting for someone," he replied, surprised by the defensive note in his voice. "Aren't we all?" she said, returning to arranging her display. "But while you're waiting, you might as well try one of these." She held out an apple so deeply red it was almost burgundy. Honeycrisp, best batch of the season. James hesitated. He didn't typically eat food handed to him by strangers, especially not before a business meeting, but something, perhaps the challenge in her eyes, made him reach out. "I'm Emma," she said as he accepted the fruit. "Emma Collins, Sunnyside Orchard. James Richardson." He didn't offer his title or company, an unusual omission for him. Emma nodded as if his name meant nothing to her, another novelty in James's world where the Richardson name opened doors and quieted rooms. "Well, James Richardson, what do you think?" He took a bite and was unprepared for the explosion of flavor, sweet, tart, and impossibly crisp. "It's surprisingly good." "Surprisingly?" Emma's eyebrow arched. "You city folks always expect the worst from anything that doesn't come wrapped in plastic, don't you?" Before James could defend himself, his phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Green apologizing for the late cancellation. An emergency board meeting had been called. James felt a flicker of alarm. Emergency meetings were never good news. "Bad news?" Emma asked, observing the change in his expression. "Just a change of plans," James replied, already calculating the fastest route back to the office. He reached for his wallet. "How much for the apple?" Emma waved him off. "First one's free. Marketing strategy." "I insist." James held out a $20 bill. Emma looked at the money, then at him, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "How about this? Take a whole bag for that 20, and I'll throw in some free advice. Whatever you're rushing back to, it'll still be there. In an hour." Something about her certainty made James pause. He was always rushing somewhere, always 3 steps ahead in a conversation, always planning the next move. What would happen if, just once, he didn't? "All right, Miss Collins, what would you suggest I do with this unexpected hour of freedom?" Emma's smile widened. "Well, Mr. Richardson, you could start by trying the homemade cider at the booth across the way, then maybe see the world from the other side of that phone screen for a change." It was presumptuous, borderline rude, and yet James found himself nodding. "Lead the way." That hour stretched to 2 as Emma introduced him to vendors she clearly knew well. The honey producer whose bees pollinated her orchard, the cheese maker who used traditional methods passed down through 4 generations, the basket weaver whose creations held Emma's apples during the fall picking season. James found himself fascinated not by the products, but by the community they represented, a web of interdependencies and relationships entirely foreign to his world of electronic transactions and competitive advantage. When his phone began, buzzing incessantly, reality intruded. The emergency board meeting was about a potential hostile takeover of a company James had recommended for investment. His weekend was officially over. "Duty calls?" Emma asked, noting his expression. "Unfortunately," James replied, surprised by his reluctance. "Thank you for the tour. It was educational." "High praise indeed," Emma laughed. "Well, if you ever want to continue your education, Sunnyside Orchard offers picking tours on Saturdays. We even let bankers participate if they promise not to calculate the ROI on each apple." James felt himself flush. "How did you... Your watch costs more than my truck, James, and you keep checking stock prices when you think I'm not looking." She handed him a simple business card with the orchard's information. "No pressure, but sometimes a change of scenery is good for the soul." James tucked the card into his pocket, telling himself he was just being polite. 3 days later, drowning in crisis management and damage control at the bank, he found himself staring at that card, Emma's words echoing in his mind. A change of scenery is good for the soul. His soul, if he still had one after years in investment banking, could certainly use the change. The drive to Willow Creek took James through landscapes that transformed from manicured suburban developments to rolling countryside. Sunnyside Orchard announced itself with a hand-painted sign and a rutted gravel driveway that made James wince for his car's suspension. He parked beside a weathered barn and sat for a moment, already regretting the impulse that had brought him here. Emma emerged from between rows of apple trees, carrying a wooden crate filled with fruit. She stopped short when she saw him, surprise evident on her face. "You actually came," she said, setting down her load. James stepped out of his car, feeling awkward in what he had thought was appropriate country attire, khakis and a button-down shirt that now seemed absurdly formal. "You said Saturdays were for tours." "They are," Emma nodded, looking him up and down with that same amused expression from the market. "Though most tourists wear something they don't mind getting dirty." "I can observe from a distance," James offered. Emma laughed, the sound startlingly genuine. "That's not how it works here, Richardson. At Sunnyside, everybody works." She gestured toward a small shed. "There's some old coveralls in there that might fit you, unless you're too concerned about your image." It was a challenge, plain and simple. James Richardson had built his career on never backing down from challenges, even if this one was entirely outside his expertise. An hour later, dressed in faded coveralls with dirt embedded under his manicured nails, James was receiving a crash course in apple harvesting from Emma's farm hand, an elderly man named Joe who seemed to find James's presence endlessly entertaining. "Gently twist, don't pull," Joe corrected for the third time as James mangled another separation. "These ain't stocks and bonds, city boy. They're living things." Emma appeared at the end of the row, carrying water bottles. "How's our new recruit?" "Doing, Joe?" "About as good as you'd expect," Joe chuckled. "But he's stubborn, I'll give him that." Emma handed James a water bottle, her fingers sun-warmed against his. "Stubborn is good in this business. Seasons don't care about your plans or preferences. You adapt or you fail." James took a long drink, studying Emma over the bottle's rim. In her element, she moved with a confidence that matched any executive in his boardroom. "How long has your family owned this orchard?" A shadow crossed Emma's face. "My parents bought it when I was 12. They died 3 years ago. Car accident on the delivery route to Oakridge." She spoke matter-of-factly, but James recognized the undertone of loss. "I've been running it since then." "By yourself?" James looked around at the vast property. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "With Joe and a few seasonal workers," Emma shrugged. "It's not the operation it used to be, but we get by." James's analytical mind immediately began calculating acreage, labor costs, market prices. It must be difficult to compete with corporate agriculture. "We don't compete," Emma corrected him. "We offer something different, quality over quantity, relationship over transaction." She gestured to the trees around them. "These heirloom varieties won't survive mechanical harvesting or long-distance shipping, but people who know the difference will drive an hour for them." "Not a very efficient business model," James observed. Emma's eyes flashed. "Not everything valuable can be measured on a spreadsheet, Richardson." Before James could respond, a truck came bouncing up the driveway, spraying gravel. A woman about Emma's age leapt out, waving frantically. "Em, you won't believe what happened." The woman skidded to a stop when she spotted James. "Oh, sorry. Didn't realize you had company. Sarah, this is James. He's learning about apple harvesting. James, this is Sarah Mitchell, my best friend and occasional voice of reason." Sarah gave James a quick once-over, her expression shifting from surprise to speculation. "Nice to meet you, James. Emma doesn't usually bring strays home from the market." "I'm not," James began. "He's not a stray," Emma interrupted. "He's paying full price for the experience." She turned to Sarah. "What's the emergency?" Sarah's excitement returned. Meadowbrook Estate is going up for auction. The county finally seized it for back taxes. James watched Emma's face carefully, noting how she tensed at the news, her casual demeanor suddenly rigid. Meadowbrook? Are you sure? Absolutely positive. Auctions in 3 weeks. Sarah glanced at James, then back to Emma meaningfully. This could be it, Em, the chance we've been waiting for. Emma nodded slowly. We'll talk about it later. Her tone closed the subject definitively. James, accustomed to reading people across negotiation tables, recognized the signs of a significant secret. The casual farm girl had depths he hadn't anticipated. His curiosity was piqued. By the time James left Sunnyside that evening, his expensive clothes were filthy. His back ached from unaccustomed labor, and he had somehow agreed to return the following Saturday. Driving back toward the gleaming towers of Oakridge City, he found himself wondering about Meadowbrook Estate and why it seemed to matter so much to a struggling apple farmer. James's return to Sunnyside Orchard became a weekly ritual through the harvest season. He told himself it was a stress relief mechanism, physical labor as an antidote to the increasing pressures at the bank, where the hostile takeover situation had evolved into a full-blown crisis. Each Saturday, he stripped away his corporate persona along with his designer clothes, immersing himself in the rhythm of the orchard. Emma proved to be as knowledgeable about agriculture as James was about finance, explaining grafting techniques, soil composition, and the complex economies of small-scale farming, with a passion that reminded him of his own early days in banking, before spreadsheets had replaced purpose. "You're getting better," Emma acknowledged one afternoon as they sorted apples in the barn. "You've almost got city boy hands anymore." James examined his calloused palms with a mixture of horror and pride. "My manicurist is going to fire me as a client." Emma laughed, the sound echoing in the rafters. Over the weeks, her initial wariness had softened into something approaching friendship. "Can't have that. Financial crisis on Wall Street. Banker. Loses manicurist, markets tumble. You mock, but appearance matters in my world," James replied, though without his usual defensiveness. "Client trust is built on perception." "And what does your world think of your weekend adventures in agriculture?" Emma asked, her tone light, but her eyes searching. The truth was, James had told no one. Not his mother, who continued to arrange accidental meetings with suitable young women from their social circle. Not Daniel Whitman, his closest friend at the bank, who would certainly question his sanity. Definitely not Thomas Green, who had finally announced that James's VP promotion would be confirmed after the quarterly gala. "My world doesn't know," he admitted. "They wouldn't understand." Emma nodded, unsurprised. 2 separate lives. Must be exhausting, being different people. "I'm not..." James started to protest, then stopped himself. She was right. Here, among the apple trees, he was becoming someone his colleagues wouldn't recognize. Someone who occasionally laughed without restraint. Someone who had learned to appreciate silence. Someone who looked forward to simple meals at Emma's farmhouse kitchen table more than expensive restaurant reservations. "The real question," Emma continued, her focus apparently on the apples she was sorting, "is which version is the real James Richardson?" Before he could answer, Sarah burst into the barn, her expression thunderous. "They've moved up the auction. Meadowbrook goes on the block next Friday." Emma dropped the apple she was holding. "What? They can't do that. The notice said 3 weeks." "Well, they did," Sarah fumed. "Apparently there's been significant interest from out-of-state developers. They're fast-tracking everything." James watched as Emma paced the barn, her usual composure shattered. "This ruins everything," she muttered. "I don't have the liquid assets ready. The bank won't process the loan transfer that quickly." "What's Meadowbrook Estate?" James asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Emma and Sarah exchanged a look, having seemingly forgotten his presence. After a moment's hesitation, Emma sighed. It's the property adjoining Sunnyside to the north. 300 acres, historic main house, outbuildings. It's been abandoned for years while the old owner's estate was in probate. She hesitated. I've been trying to buy it. The water rights alone would double Sunnyside's production capacity. It was a substantial ambition for someone who claimed to be barely keeping her small orchard afloat. James's banker instincts tingled. That's a multi-million-dollar property. Yes, Emma acknowledged without elaboration. And now I'm going to lose it to some developer who'll probably bulldoze the orchards and build condos. James found himself offering without thinking. I could help. I have experience with accelerated financing options. No offense, James, but bank loans take time I don't have anymore, Emma replied, frustration evident in her voice. Not necessarily, James countered, his mind already calculating possibilities. Private bridge financing could work, especially if you have collateral. Emma and Sarah exchanged another loaded glance. I appreciate the offer, Emma said finally. But this is my problem to solve. James nodded, recognizing the dismissal. For the first time since they'd met, he felt the full weight of being an outsider in Emma's world. The auction notice consumed James's thoughts over the following days. During meetings about investment strategies and market projections, he found himself researching Meadowbrook Estate on his tablet. The property was even more substantial than Emma had indicated. A historic plantation with original architecture intact, prime agricultural land, and water rights that indeed made it extraordinarily valuable for farming operations. What puzzled him was Emma's interest. Even with good harvests, Sunnyside Orchard couldn't possibly generate the capital necessary for such an acquisition. Unless there was more to Emma Collins than met the eye. Thursday evening before the auction, James made a decision. After leaving the bank, instead of heading to his penthouse, he drove to Willow Creek. The lights were on in Emma's farmhouse when he arrived, unannounced and unexpected. She opened the door wearing reading glasses and flannel pajama pants. Clearly, surprised to see him. James, is everything all right? I want to help with the auction, he said without preamble. As an investor, not a lender. Emma's expression closed. You don't even know what you're investing in. I know it matters to you, James replied. That's enough to merit my interest. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped back, allowing him inside. The farmhouse kitchen was cluttered with papers, property maps, financial statements, agricultural projections. Sarah sat at the table, laptop open, and looked up in surprise. Your banker friend decided to join the party, Emma explained, her tone unreadable. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Does he know about... No, Emma cut her off, and he doesn't need to. James was just offering some professional advice, weren't you? James recognized the out she was giving him, but chose not to take it. Actually, I'm offering financial backing, but I'd need to understand the full picture first. Emma's jaw tightened. She glanced at Sarah, who gave a small shrug as if to say, your call. After a tense silence, Emma seemed to reach a decision. Follow me. She led James upstairs to a room he hadn't seen before, a small office with a surprisingly sophisticated computer setup. Emma unlocked a filing cabinet and removed a thick folder, which she handed to him without comment. Inside was a comprehensive business plan for Meadowbrook Orchards, LLC, a proposed expansion that would combine Sunnyside's operations with Meadowbrook's land into a sustainable agriculture company specializing in heirloom fruits, organic farming, methods, and agritourism. The projections were impeccable, the market analysis thorough. It was the work of someone with significant business acumen, not the struggling farmer Emma had presented herself to be. "This is exceptional, James," I said, looking up from the documents to find Emma watching him intently. "But it would require capital well beyond what a small orchard could generate," Emma finished for him. "Yes, I'm aware." She took a deep breath, then reached for another file. This one contained bank statements, substantial ones, investment, portfolios, corporate holdings. "My parents weren't just farmers," Emma said quietly. "My father was an agricultural economist who worked for the UN. My mother was an environmental engineer. They bought Sunnyside as a research site, developing sustainable farming techniques for changing climate conditions. When they died, I inherited not just the orchard, but their research funding, patents, and investment portfolio." James stared at the numbers, his banker's mind rapidly calculating her net worth. "You're comfortable?" Emma supplied with a small smile, "though most of it is tied up in research foundations and long-term investments. That's why the auction timing is problematic. I have the money, just not accessible within the new timeline." James looked around the modest farmhouse with new eyes. "Why live like this when you could have a penthouse in Oakridge Valley?" Emma challenged. "Because this is real, James. The work we do here matters. The research my parents started could help small farms survive climate change. Meadowbrook isn't just an expansion opportunity. It's a chance to scale that research, to make a difference." James felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The simple farm girl narrative he'd constructed around Emma Collins had been entirely wrong. She wasn't a charity case or a quaint diversion. She was his equal, perhaps even his superior in vision and purpose. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. Emma's expression softened. "Would it have mattered? Would you have seen me differently? Of course it would have mattered. That's why," Emma said simply. "The James Richardson who showed up at my orchard that first Saturday saw me. Not my bank accounts, not my potential connections, just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my experience?" James fell silent, recognizing the irony. He, who had spent his career being valued for his financial acumen rather than his character, had unknowingly offered Emma the very thing he'd always wanted for himself, the chance to be seen for who she was, not what she possessed. "I'll help with the auction," he said finally, "not as an investor, as a partner." Emma studied him, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded once. "Partners then. But James..." She hesitated. "If we succeed tomorrow, things will change. People will know about me, about us." "Is there an us?" James asked, the question slipping out before he could censor it. Emma's slow smile was answer enough. The auction room was packed when James and Emma arrived the next morning. James in his tailored suit, Emma in the first formal business attire he'd seen her wear, a simple navy dress that somehow made her look both authoritative and entirely herself. They made a striking pair, drawing curious glances from the assembled crowd of developers, real estate investors, and local farmers. "Richardson," a voice called across the room. "I thought that was you." James turned to find Robert Hayes approaching, his smile sharp as a shark's. Hayes was his chief rival at the bank, a man who had made no secret of his desire for the VP, position James was set to receive. "Hayes," James acknowledged coolly, "I didn't know you had agricultural interests." "I have profitable interests," Hayes corrected, his gaze sliding to Emma with undisguised assessment. "And who might this be?" "Emma Collins," she introduced herself before James could speak. "Sunnyside Orchard." Recognition flickered in Hayes's eyes. "Ah, the neighboring property. Hoping to expand your little apple business?" The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. "Something like that," Emma replied pleasantly. Hayes leaned closer to James. "Word of advice, Richardson. Stick to financial instruments. Land development is a different game entirely. First National's real estate division has already committed to backing Cumberland Development Group's bid today." He nodded toward a cluster of men in expensive suits. "Your bank is on our side of this one." James felt Emma stiffen beside him. The Cumberland Development Group was notorious for buying agricultural land and converting it to luxury housing developments. "If you'll excuse us," James said tightly, guiding Emma away. "What did he mean your bank is backing them?" Emma demanded once they were out of earshot. "I don't know," James admitted. "Real estate isn't my division, but Hayes wouldn't lie about something I could easily verify." Emma's expression hardened. "So your bank is financing the very people trying to destroy what I'm building? Convenient that you never mentioned that." "I didn't know," James insisted. "Emma, this doesn't change anything. We can still—" "It changes everything," Emma cut him off. "If First National is backing Cumberland, they'll have practically unlimited capital. We can't compete with that." Before James could respond, the auctioneer called for everyone to take their seats. The bidding was about to begin. What followed was the most tense 30 minutes of James's professional life. The opening bid from Cumberland Development was substantial, already at the upper limit of what Emma had indicated she could manage. Each subsequent bid pushed the price higher, with Emma countering until James could see the strain in her knuckles as she gripped her bidding paddle. Hayes watched from across the room, his smirk growing with each price increase. When the bidding reached 7 million, well beyond Emma's stated limit, he leaned over to whisper something to his companions, all of them chuckling. James made a split-second decision. He placed his hand over Emma's, stopping her from raising her paddle again. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Trust me," he murmured, then stood up. "Point of information," he called to the auctioneer. "I'd like to confirm whether proxy bids are permitted." The auctioneer looked surprised but nodded. "Proxy bidding is allowed with proper documentation of authorization." James reached into his briefcase and withdrew a document he'd prepared the night before. "I am authorized to bid on behalf of Collins Agricultural Research Foundation with secured financing through private equity." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hayes's smirk faltered. "Very well, Mr. Richardson." "James Richardson, representing Collins Foundation." The auctioneer nodded. "Bidding continues at 7,100,000. James raised his hand. 8 million. The room went silent. Hayes conferred urgently with the Cumberland representatives. 8,500,000, Hayes countered, his confidence visibly shaken. James didn't hesitate. 10 million. Emma grabbed his arm. "James, what are you doing? We don't have—" "Yes, we do," James said quietly. "Remember, partners." Hayes and his group huddled together, clearly recalculating. Finally, one of them shook his head. "Cumberland Development Group withdraws from bidding," Hayes announced, his voice tight with suppressed fury. 10 million going once, twice. "Sold to Collins Agricultural Research Foundation," the auctioneer declared, bringing down his gavel with a decisive crack. As the crowd dispersed, Hayes approached them, his expression thunderous. "This isn't over, Richardson. The bank won't look kindly on you, undermining an established client relationship. Your VP position isn't confirmed yet." "Actually, Robert," James replied calmly, "I believe I just secured a far more valuable partnership." He placed his hand on the small of Emma's back. "Send my regrets to the board. I'll be tendering my resignation on Monday." Hayes stormed away, leaving James and Emma alone in the rapidly emptying auction room. "You just quit your job," Emma said, sounding stunned. "The promotion you've worked years for." James smiled, feeling lighter than he had in longer than he could remember. "I believe I just made a much better investment." "But the 10 million, James, I don't have that kind of liquid capital, even with your help. I do, he said simply. Or rather, I did. It's now invested in our partnership, however you want to define that. Emma stared at him. You just spent your entire fortune on a property you've never even seen, based on a business plan you reviewed for all of 12 hours? James laughed. When you put it that way, it does sound insane. But I'm not investing in a property, Emma. I'm investing in you, in us, in something real. Emma's expression softened. You really mean that? I've spent my life chasing numbers on a screen, James said. You showed me something different, something worth building. If you'll have me as a partner, I'd like to help build it with you. Instead of answering, Emma reached up and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted of apples and possibility. The next 6 months transformed James's life in ways he could never have predicted. Meadowbrook Estate, grand and neglected, became the center of their shared vision. The historic main house required extensive renovation, which James oversaw, with the same attention to detail he had once applied to investment portfolios. The orchards, overgrown but salvageable, were carefully pruned and restored under Emma's expert guidance. Word spread quickly through Oakridge Valley's social circles about James Richardson's dramatic career change. Victoria Richardson was initially horrified by her son's decision to abandon banking for farming, but her attitude softened considerably after her first visit to Meadowbrook, where the historic grandeur of the main house appealed to her sense of propriety. At least it's a proper estate, she sniffed, running a gloved finger along a newly restored mantelpiece, though I still don't understand why you couldn't have just bought it as a weekend retreat and kept your position at the bank. Because this isn't a hobby, Mother, James explained patiently. It's my life now. Victoria studied her son carefully. You've changed, Jameson. For the better, I hope, he replied. After a moment's consideration, Victoria nodded reluctantly. You seem settled. I suppose that counts for something. Emma proved to be as adept at business as she was at farming. Together, they expanded the Collins Agricultural Research Foundation, securing additional funding for sustainable farming initiatives. James's financial expertise complemented Emma's scientific knowledge, creating a partnership that yielded impressive results. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their professional one. James moved into the farmhouse rather than the grand Meadowbrook mansion, preferring the warmth and simplicity of Emma's home to the imposing formality of the estate. They fell into a rhythm together, days filled with purposeful work, evenings spent planning their shared future. The contrast between James's former life and his current one was never more apparent than when Daniel Whitman, his former colleague from the bank, visited Meadowbrook 6 months after the auction. I still can't believe it, Daniel marveled as James showed him around the property. You gave up everything for dirt and trees. James laughed. I didn't give up everything, Daniel. I just traded one set of assets for another. Daniel shook his head. Hayes got your promotion, you know. He's making sure everyone knows you had some kind of breakdown. And do you believe that? James asked, curious rather than concerned. Daniel surveyed the thriving orchards, the historic estate being carefully restored, and the evident contentment in his friend's demeanor. No, he admitted, but I don't understand it either. You were at the top of your game, James. I was. Playing the wrong game, James replied simply. How's your blood pressure these days, Daniel? Still taking those pills? Daniel grimaced. Up to 2 a day now. Doctor says it's stress. Mine's normal for the first time in a decade, James said. I sleep through the night. I eat food I can actually identify, and I haven't had to fake interest in someone's conversation at a charity gala in months. Daniel laughed despite himself. Okay, I get the point, but not everyone can just walk away from everything they've built. I didn't walk away, James corrected him. I walked towards something better. As autumn approached again, marking Nearly a year since James and Emma had first met, the Meadowbrook Sunnyside operation was becoming a notable success. Their organic heirloom apples commanded premium prices in specialty markets, and the research foundation had begun attracting international attention. Emma remained something of a mystery in Oakridge social circles. Despite her obvious intelligence and the growing evidence of her substantial resources, she maintained a low profile, preferring work clothes to cocktail dresses, farm equipment to luxury cars. The rumors about her background grew increasingly elaborate, especially after it became clear that James Richardson, once Oakridge's most eligible bachelor, was seriously involved with the Apple Girl. It was Sarah who finally brought the situation to a head one evening as she, Emma, and James shared dinner at the farmhouse. "You know what they're saying in town?" Sarah asked, refilling her wineglass. "That Emma's either a con artist who's somehow bamboozled James out of his fortune, or she's an eccentric heiress slumming it for the aesthetic." Emma rolled her eyes. "Let them talk. It doesn't matter." "It matters to James," Sarah pointed out bluntly. "He's got one foot in each world, and the gossip isn't doing him any favors professionally." James started to protest, but Emma held up a hand. "Is that true? Is this affecting your consulting work?" After leaving the bank, James had established a small financial consultancy specializing in agricultural investments. His client list, initially built on his banking reputation, had begun to include sustainable farming operations across the region. But several potential clients had backed away after hearing rumors about his relationship with Emma. "It's not affecting me," James insisted, though his slight hesitation betrayed him. Emma set down her fork, her expression resolute. "This has gone on long enough. It's time to make things official, both personally and professionally." "What do you have in mind?" James asked. "The Harvest Charity Gala is next month," Emma said. "I think it's time for Collins Agricultural Research Foundation to make a proper debut in Oakridge society." Sarah choked on her wine. "You're going to the gala, voluntarily?" Emma's smile held a hint of mischief. "Why not? James has been living in my world. Perhaps it's time I step into his." James studied her thoughtfully. "Are you sure? You've always said you don't care what those people think." "I don't," Emma confirmed, "but I care about you. And if clearing the air will help your business, then let's clear it thoroughly." The night of the Harvest Charity Gala arrived with all the pomp and circumstance of Oakridge Valley's most prestigious annual event. The ballroom of the Grand Riverfront Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and affluent attendees in formal wear. Victoria Richardson held court near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced warmth while subtly assessing their social standing. When James arrived, his mother's smile brightened genuinely. Then she spotted Emma on his arm, and her expression froze. Emma wore a simple but elegant emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair, which was styled in loose waves rather than her usual practical braid. She looked beautiful, but more importantly, she looked entirely comfortable in her own skin, neither intimidated by the opulence around her, nor trying too hard to belong. "Mother," James greeted Victoria with a kiss on the cheek. "You remember Emma Collins?" "Of course," Victoria replied, her social training overriding her surprise. "How unexpected to see you here, Miss Collins." "Mrs. Richardson," Emma nodded, politely. "James speaks of you often. I've been looking forward to knowing you better." Victoria's assessment was swift and critical, taking in Emma's dress, tasteful but not designer, jewelry, a simple pendant that Victoria couldn't place but suspected was expensive, and demeanor, confident without being brash. "Perhaps we can arrange lunch next week," she offered, a tentative olive branch. "I'd like that," Emma replied with a genuine smile that made Victoria blink in surprise. As James guided Emma further into the ballroom, whispers followed them like ripples in a pond, Robert Hayes, now Senior Vice President of Investments, watched their entrance with undisguised disdain. "Ignore him," James murmured. "Oh, I intend to do much more than that," Emma replied with a smile that made James suddenly wary. Thomas Green, the bank president who had once been James's mentor, approached them with genuine pleasure. "Richardson, good to see you. We've missed your insights at First National." "Thank you, sir," James replied warmly. "May I introduce Emma Collins, my partner in Meadowbrook Sunnyside Orchards and the director of Collins Agricultural Research Foundation." Green shook Emma's hand with interest. "I've been hearing impressive things about your operation. That new irrigation system you're developing could be revolutionary for drought-prone regions." "That's very kind," Emma acknowledged, "though I can't take full credit. James's financial modeling helped secure the development funding." Green glanced between them, reassessing. "You make quite the team." "We do," James agreed, his hand finding Emma's. The evening progressed smoothly until the auction portion of the gala began. Hayes took the stage as the event chair, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we continue our tradition of supporting Oakridge Valley's charitable initiatives through your generous donations. Our first item is a weekend getaway at the Pine Lake Resort, generously donated by the Hayworth family. The bidding proceeded predictably, with the Valley's elite competing good-naturedly for overpriced vacation packages and exclusive dining experiences. Emma watched the proceedings with anthropological interest, occasionally whispering observations to James that made him stifle laughter. Then Hayes announced the final item, the one traditionally commanding the highest bids. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. This year's signature auction item is a private concert with Grammy-winning pianist Anton Valdez, followed by dinner prepared by Chef Maurice from Le Ciel. We'll start the bidding at $10,000. Paddles rose around the room as the price quickly escalated. Victoria Richardson participated enthusiastically, clearly hoping to secure the prestigious item. When the bidding reached $50,000, most contenders had dropped out except for Victoria and Margaret Hayworth, who exchanged increasingly tight smiles with each bid. At $75,000, Margaret Hayworth reluctantly lowered her paddle, leaving Victoria triumphant. Hayes was about to declare her the winner when a clear voice cut through the room. $100,000. All heads turned to Emma, her paddle raised decisively. Victoria's expression was a mixture of shock and outrage. Hayes recovered quickly. "We have 100,000 from Ms. Collins. Do I hear 110? Victoria hesitated, then shook her head slightly. The room held its collective breath as Hayes brought down the gavel. "Sold to Emma Collins for $100,000. As polite applause rippled through the crowd, Emma made her way to the stage to complete the transaction. James followed, curious about what she was planning. Hayes handed Emma the microphone with poorly concealed disdain. "Perhaps you'd like to say a few words about your generous donation." Emma accepted the microphone with a gracious nod. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'm honored to support tonight's worthy causes." She turned to address the room. "But I'd like to make a slight modification to my prize, if I may. Instead of claiming the private concert for myself, I'd like to donate it to Willow Creek Elementary School, where many of our orchard workers' children attend. And I'd like to invite everyone here tonight to join us for that concert, which will launch the Collins Richardson Scholarship Fund for Agricultural Innovation." A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. Emma continued, her voice clear and confident. "For those who don't know me, I'm Emma Collins. My parents were Dr. Jonathan Collins and Dr. Eleanor Reeves Collins, whose work in sustainable agriculture has helped farming communities in 27 countries. When they died 3 years ago, I continued their legacy through the Collins Foundation, which now partners with James Richardson in developing economically viable solutions for independent farmers. The room had gone completely silent. Even Victoria Richardson was staring open-mouthed at the woman she had dismissed as a simple farm girl. James and I believe that true wealth isn't measured by bank accounts or social standing, but by the positive impact we can have on our communities and our planet. We invite all of you to visit Meadowbrook Estate next month for our open house, where you can see firsthand what we're building together. She handed the microphone back to a stunned Hayes and returned to James's side, a faint blush the only indication that the public speech had cost her any effort. "Well," Victoria said faintly as she approached them, "it seems I have rather underestimated you, Miss Collins." "Please, call me Emma," she replied with a warm smile, "and I hope you'll still join me for lunch next week. I'd love your input on the restoration of Meadowbrook's formal gardens." Victoria blinked, then nodded slowly. "I believe I would enjoy that very much." Later that night, as they drove back to the farmhouse in comfortable silence, James finally asked the question that had been on his mind all evening. "Why didn't you tell me you were planning that announcement?" Emma smiled, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Because you would have insisted on helping me prepare, and it would have sounded rehearsed. Some moments need to be authentic. Your parents, I knew they were accomplished, but you never mentioned they were so well known in their field." Emma shrugged. "They were famous in agricultural circles, not exactly household names. Besides, I wanted to make my own way, not trade on their reputation." James reached across to take her hand. "You did that tonight. Brilliantly." "We did," Emma corrected him. "That's the point of partnership, isn't it? Equal strengths applied together." As they turned onto the gravel drive of Sunnyside Orchard, the familiar crunch of stones under tires welcoming them home, James felt a certainty he had never experienced in his years of financial analysis. Some investments yielded returns that couldn't be calculated on spreadsheets. Spring at Meadowbrook Sunnyside brought blossoms and challenges in equal measure. The orchards exploded in pale pink and white flowers, promising a bountiful harvest to come, while Emma and James's relationship deepened with the changing season. The success of the Harvest Gala announcement had transformed their public image. The Collins-Richardson partnership was now seen as an innovative venture rather than an eccentric dalliance. James's consultancy flourished, while Emma's research foundation attracted prestigious grants and collaborations. Their personal partnership, however, remained undefined. They shared their work, their vision, and increasingly their lives. Emma's farmhouse became their primary residence, though James maintained his penthouse in the city for occasional overnight stays when business required it. Victoria Richardson had undergone the most surprising transformation, developing a genuine affection for Emma after their garden planning lunch extended into a weekly tradition. The formal gardens at Meadowbrook Estate were being restored under their joint supervision, with Victoria contributing her extensive knowledge of historical landscape design, while Emma ensured the results were both beautiful and sustainable. "You've done the impossible," James remarked one evening, as he and Emma reviewed architectural plans for converting one of Meadowbrook's outbuildings into a research laboratory. "You've charmed my mother into approving of something I've done." Emma laughed. "Your mother and I understand each other better than you might think. We both recognize quality when we see it." Her gaze lingered on him meaningfully. James set aside the blueprints and took her hand. "I've been thinking. The main house renovations are nearly complete. We should consider where we want to live permanently." "Are you suggesting we move into the mansion?" Emma asked, her expression unreadable. "I'm suggesting we decide together," James replied carefully. "The farmhouse is home to me now, but Meadowbrook offers more space for both living and working. Emma was quiet for a moment. This farmhouse was the last place I lived with my parents. Moving would mean letting go of that connection. I understand, James said softly. There's no rush to decide. Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. Actually, I've been thinking about it too. Meadowbrook could be our future while we preserve Sunnyside as part of our history. Perhaps the farmhouse could become a visitor center for educational programs. You continue to surprise me, Collins, James said, pulling her close. Good, Emma replied, kissing him lightly. I'd hate to become predictable. The predictability they had both avoided arrived the following week in the form of an unexpected letter. Emma brought in the mail as usual, sorting through invoices and business correspondence at the kitchen table while James prepared dinner, a domestic skill he had developed with the same methodical dedication he once applied to market analysis. James. Something in Emma's voice made him turn from the stove immediately. She held a thick envelope bearing an official seal. It's from the Westridge Global Agricultural Fund. James recognized the name, one of the most prestigious research organizations in sustainable agriculture, known for its selective annual fellowship that funded groundbreaking work in food security and climate adaptation. They want to partner with the foundation, Emma continued, her voice strange. They're offering a fully funded 3-year program to implement our irrigation technology in drought-affected regions across 5 continents. Emma, that's incredible, James exclaimed. It's exactly what your parents were working toward. Emma nodded, her expression a complex mixture of pride and uncertainty. It would mean traveling for extended periods, months at a time probably. The implication hung in the air between them. James returned to the stove, turning down the heat under the simmering sauce before it could burn. When would it start? 3 months from now. The initial phase would be in North Africa and the Middle East. Emma set the letter down carefully. It's a remarkable opportunity. It's the culmination of everything you've been working for. James agreed, his voice steady despite the sudden hollowness in his chest. You have to accept it. Emma studied him. Do I? Of course, James insisted. This is your life's work, your parents' legacy. And what about our work? Emma asked quietly. Our legacy? James forced a smile. The orchards will be here. When you return, I can manage operations while you're traveling. Technology makes long-distance collaboration easier than ever. That's not what I meant, Emma said, rising from the table to stand before him. James, we've built something here, not just the business, but us, this life together. Which is why I would never ask you to turn down an opportunity like this, James replied, taking her hands in his. We can make it work. Emma's gaze was searching. Could you come with me, at least for parts of it? James considered the logistics. His consultancy was increasingly self-sustaining, with a small but capable staff. The orchard operations were well established, with Joe and the seasonal workers familiar with the routines. Meadowbrook's restoration was nearly complete. Still, someone would need to maintain their presence locally. I could join you periodically, he offered. Maybe alternate months. One here, one with you. Emma nodded slowly. We'd be apart half the time for 3 years. If that's what it takes, James said firmly. The next month passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Emma immersed herself in background research on the regions she would be visiting, while James restructured their business operations to function smoothly during their planned absences. They didn't discuss the approaching separation beyond practical arrangements, as if acknowledging the emotional aspect might make it unbearable. The changes extended beyond their relationship. Daniel Whitman left First National to join James's consultancy as a partner, bringing valuable connections and expertise. Sarah Mitchell took on increased responsibilities at the Research Foundation, preparing to serve as Emma's eyes and ears on the ground during her travels. 2 weeks before Emma's scheduled departure, Robert Hayes arrived unannounced at Meadowbrook Estate. James was inspecting the nearly completed laboratory building when Hayes's luxury sedan pulled into the circular drive. "Quite a setup you've got here, Richardson," Hayes called as he stepped out of his car, his designer suit incongruous against the rural backdrop. Rustic charm meets high-tech innovation, very on-trend. James approached warily. "Hayes, this is unexpected. Thought I'd see for myself what lured you away from civilization," Hayes replied, surveying the property with a practiced eye. "Mind if we talk privately? Business proposition I think might interest you." Curiosity overrode caution, and James led Hayes to the main house's newly restored study, a room that balanced historical character with modern functionality, much like the business itself. Hayes whistled appreciatively at the space. "Have to admit, you've done well for yourself here. Different path than I expected, but impressive nonetheless." "Thank you," James said, his guard still up. "What's this about, Robert?" Hayes settled into a leather armchair without waiting for an invitation. "Word is, your partner's taking her show on the road. Global Agricultural Fellowship, very prestigious. Congratulations." "How did you—" "Oakridge Valley has no secrets. You know that," Hayes interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Which brings me to my proposition. First National is establishing a new division focused on sustainable investment. Green finance is the next big thing, and the board wants someone with both banking experience and practical knowledge of the sector." James frowned. "You want me to consult for First National?" "I want you to come back and head the new division," Hayes corrected him. "Senior Executive VP position, direct report to Green, substantial equity package. You'd be crazy not to consider it." James stared at his former rival. "Why me? You've made no secret of your disdain for my career choices." Hayes shrugged. "Personal feelings aside, you've proven you understand this market better than anyone else at the bank. Your agricultural investment portfolio has outperformed our general funds by 12% over the past year. The board has noticed." "I'm flattered," James said carefully, "but I have commitments here." "Commitments that are about to go on a 3-year world tour," Hayes pointed out bluntly. "Be realistic, Richardson. Long-distance relationships rarely survive that kind of separation, especially when one partner is building something exciting while the other stays behind minding the store." The words hit uncomfortably close to James's unspoken fears. "Emma and I are partners in every sense. We've planned for this." Hayes leaned forward, his expression almost sympathetic. "I'm sure you have, but plans change, people change. 3 years is a long time." "I appreciate the offer," James said firmly, "but my answer is no." Hayes nodded, as if he'd expected the response. "The offer stands for the next 30 days. Think about it." He rose to leave, then paused at the door. "You know what your problem always was, Richardson? You're too loyal for your own good. Loyalty to the bank held you back from pursuing better opportunities elsewhere. Now loyalty to this arrangement will keep you stagnating while life moves on without you." After Hayes departed, James remained in the study, his former colleague's words echoing uncomfortably. The doubt that had been simmering beneath the surface of his confidence bubbled up, despite his efforts to suppress it. Would Emma change during her time away? Would she meet brilliant researchers, charismatic leaders, people whose daily lives aligned with her mission in ways his never could? Would she return to find him unchanged, predictable, rooted to the land while she had soared across continents? Emma found him there hours later, still sitting in contemplative silence. "James, Sarah mentioned someone from the bank visited. Everything okay?" He looked up, studying her face, the face that had become the center of his world without him, fully realizing it until now. Hayes offered me a position heading a new sustainable investment division at First National. Emma's expression shifted through surprise, understanding, then careful neutrality. That's significant. What did you tell him? That I have commitments here, James replied, but he raised some points I can't entirely dismiss. Such as? Emma's voice was quiet. James stood, needing to move. 3 years is a long time, Emma. You'll be doing extraordinary work, meeting extraordinary people. I'll be here doing the same things day after day. What if I outgrow you? Emma finished for him. Or what if you grow resentful of being left behind? James nodded reluctantly. Emma was silent for a long moment. Do you want to accept the bank's offer? No, James said immediately, then hesitated. But I wonder if I should. If it would be healthier for both of us to have our own separate paths. No expectations, no restrictions. I see. Emma's voice was carefully controlled. So you're suggesting we, take a break while I'm away? Free ourselves from commitment? I'm suggesting that I don't want to hold you back, James clarified, frustrated by his inability to articulate his fears without sounding insecure. I don't want you feeling obligated to check in with the boyfriend back home when you should be fully present in your work. Boyfriend? Emma repeated, her eyebrows rising. Is that how you see yourself? After everything we've built together? James ran a hand through his hair. That's part of the problem, isn't it? We've never actually defined what we are to each other. Partners in business, certainly. But beyond that, we've just been existing together, without making any formal commitments. Emma's expression softened. I didn't realize you needed formal definitions. I thought what we had transcended conventional labels. Maybe labels serve a purpose, James argued. Maybe they provide security when circumstances change. And that's what you want? Security? Emma asked, stepping closer. I want to know that what we have is strong enough to withstand distance and time, James admitted. Emma nodded slowly. And you think Hayes's offer provides an alternative? Something to fill the void while I'm gone? It would give me a focus beyond waiting for your return, James acknowledged. Emma turned away, walking to the window that overlooked the orchards, their orchards, stretching toward the horizon in neat, promising rows. I've been selfish, she said finally. I assumed you understood what this place means to me, what you mean to me, without me ever actually saying it. She turned back to face him, her expression more vulnerable than he had ever seen it. I never told you why my parents bought Sunnyside Orchard, did I? The full story. James shook his head, confused by the apparent change in subject. They weren't just agricultural researchers, Emma continued. They were dreamers. They believed in building something that would outlast them, something that would grow and sustain itself and others for generations. This land wasn't just a research site. It was meant to be a legacy, a home base for the Collins family's work in perpetuity. She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. When they died, I thought that vision died with them. I was just going through the motions, maintaining what they'd built without any real hope for the future. Then you showed up at my market stall, in your ridiculous designer clothes, looking completely out of place, and yet somehow exactly where you belonged. James smiled despite himself at the memory. You didn't just help me acquire Meadowbrook, James. You helped me reclaim my parents' vision and make it my own, our own. This fellowship isn't me leaving you behind. It's me taking our shared work to the world, knowing that you're here, keeping our foundations strong. I want to believe that, James said softly. Then believe this, Emma replied, releasing his hands to reach into her pocket. She withdrew, a small, worn leather box that looked like it had been carried for some time. I've been waiting for the right moment, but maybe there is no perfect time. She opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a band of what appeared to be wood, inlaid with a thin line of gold. This was my father's. He designed it himself. Apple wood from the oldest tree at Sunnyside with gold he and my mother panned on their first research trip to South America. James stared at the ring, then at Emma, understanding dawning slowly. "James Richardson," Emma said formally, "I'm not asking you to wait for me while I'm gone. I'm asking you to marry me before I leave, so that everywhere I go as your wife, and everywhere you are as my husband. Not because we need labels, but because I want the whole world to know that what we've built together is permanent, unshakable, and worth coming home to." James felt the doubt that had been clouding his mind dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. "Hayes was right about one thing," he said, taking the ring from its box. "I am loyal to a fault, but he was wrong about where that loyalty belongs." He slipped the ring onto his finger, where it fit as if it had been made for him. "Yes, Emma. Collins, I will marry you before you leave, and I will be here when you return, not because I'm waiting, but because this is where we both belong." Emma's smile was radiant as she pulled him into a kiss that felt like a promise, not just for their immediate future, but for the legacy they would build together, season after season, year after year. The wedding took place in the apple orchard at Sunnyside, trees heavy with pink blossoms that occasionally drifted down onto the small gathering of friends and family. No elaborate preparations, no society announcements, just a simple, heartfelt ceremony that reflected the authentic foundation of their relationship. Victoria Richardson, resplendent in a tasteful blue ensemble, sat in the front row alongside Sarah Mitchell and Joe from the orchard. Daniel Whitman served as James's best man, still clearly bemused by his friend's transformation from corporate strategist to orchard owner. Thomas Green attended as well, his presence a tacit endorsement of James's unconventional career path. Emma wore a simple white dress that moved like water around her as she walked between the trees to where James waited. Her hair was loose, adorned only with small white blossoms, and her feet were bare on the grass, the farm girl and the sophisticated businesswoman in perfect harmony. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged both their shared vision and the journey ahead. Emma promised to carry their work forward into the world and to always find her way back home. James promised to maintain their foundation and to meet her wherever in the world she needed him. The reception was held on the lawn of Meadowbrook Estate, the historic mansion providing a stately backdrop to the celebration. Local farm-to-table catering, wines from neighboring vineyards, and music from Willow Creek's community band created an atmosphere that bridged James's former world and Emma's lifelong one. Victoria found James alone for a moment as he watched. Emma dancing with Joe, the elderly farmhand moving with surprising grace for his years. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said without preamble. "I underestimated her and you." James smiled at his mother. "You weren't the only one. I underestimated what was possible outside the path I'd planned for myself." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Your father would have understood, I think. He always said you had a gift for recognizing value others missed." She squeezed his arm affectionately. "Be happy, Jameson. That's all we ever really wanted for you." Diddled. The weeks following the wedding passed in a bittersweet blur of preparation. Emma's departure date approached inexorably, each day both precious and poignant. They finalized business arrangements, established communication protocols, and created contingency plans for every scenario they could imagine. The night before Emma's flight, they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, drinking apple cider from Sunnyside's first batch of the season. The air was warm, scented with late summer herbs from the garden Emma had meticulously explained to James how to maintain in her absence. "I got you something," James said, retrieving a package from inside. A going-away present of sorts. Emma unwrapped it to find a sleek tablet computer in a rugged case. Thank you, but I already packed my laptop and tablet. This one's special, James explained. It's loaded with a program Daniel helped me develop. Every day, it will show you a different view from Meadowbrook Sunnyside, the orchards, the gardens, the restoration projects. Live feeds that you can access any time to see exactly what's happening here. Emma turned the tablet on, and the screen displayed a real-time view of their apple orchards in the soft evening light. So I can always see home, she whispered. And this, James continued, handing her a smaller package. Inside was a watch, elegant but practical, clearly designed for someone who worked with their hands. Turn it over, James instructed. Emma flipped the watch to find an inscription on the back. Time and distance are no match for roots grown together. All my love, Jay. It's set to both local time and Oakridge time, James explained. So you always know what time it is here. And it's synchronized with mine. He showed her his wrist, where an identical watch gleamed. When you tap this button twice, my watch vibrates. Just a little reminder that you're thinking of me, even when we can't talk. Emma slipped the watch onto her wrist, blinking back, tears. It's perfect. I have something for you too. She retrieved a folder from inside and handed it to him. Open it tomorrow, after I've gone, not before. James nodded, setting the folder aside without question. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet conversation, making memories to sustain them through the separation ahead. The airport goodbye was brief by mutual agreement. A kiss, a whispered, "I love you." And then Emma was walking through security, turning once to wave before disappearing into the crowd of travelers. James watched until she was completely out of sight, the weight of her absence already settling over him like a physical presence. Back at Meadowbrook, the emptiness of the house seemed to echo with each step. James made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, finally opening the folder Emma had left him. Inside was a detailed timeline, not of her fellowship itinerary, which they had already reviewed together, but of their future. Emma had mapped out the next 20 years of Meadowbrook Sunnyside's development, with branches of research, expansion plans, potential collaborations, and even personal milestones. Notes in her distinctive handwriting filled the margins, some practical, some whimsical, all infused with her characteristic blend of vision and pragmatism. On the final page was a handwritten letter. My dearest James, by now I'm somewhere over the Atlantic, already missing you but excited for what lies ahead, not just for me but for us. This separation isn't an ending or even a pause, it's simply a different chapter in the story we're writing together. While I'm gone, I want you to do something for me. Don't just maintain what we've built, grow it. Not only the orchards and the research, but yourself. Take risks, try new approaches, make decisions without consulting me sometimes. I trust you completely, and I want you to trust yourself. Remember that banker who showed up at my market stall in his designer clothes? He thought he knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. Then he discovered he was capable of so much more than he had imagined. That's the man I fell in love with. Not because he was perfect, but because he was brave enough to question everything he thought he knew about himself. I won't ask you not to miss me, because I'll be missing you terribly. But I will ask you to use this time. Hayes was wrong about one thing. You won't be stagnating while I'm gone. You'll be becoming an even more extraordinary version of yourself, just as I hope to be when I return. This fellowship is part of our legacy, not separate from it. What I learn, what I accomplish, what connections I make, all of it comes back. To us, to Meadowbrook Sunnyside, to the future we're building together. Look at the watch I know you're wearing, and remember, no matter how many miles or time zones separate us, We're still growing together, roots intertwined, reaching toward the same sun. All my love, now and always, Emma. James read the letter twice, then carefully returned it to the folder. He looked around the kitchen, their kitchen, and for the first time since the airport, he smiled. This wasn't an ending. It wasn't even an intermission. It was simply the next season in their shared story, and like any good farmer, he would make the most of what each season offered. The first months of Emma's absence were the hardest. They spoke daily when possible, sharing updates and maintaining their connection across continents. James watched through the tablet as Emma worked with farmers in Morocco, teaching irrigation techniques that could transform desert communities. Emma monitored the fall harvest at Meadowbrook Sunnyside, offering advice on timing and storage methods during their video calls. True to his word, James met Emma in Egypt for a week, then again in Israel the following month. Their reunions were passionate, joyful, and all too brief. The partings never got easier, but they developed rituals that helped, always tapping their watches simultaneously as one boarded a plane, always sending a photo of the moon from wherever they were, a shared celestial companion no matter the distance. 3 months into Emma's fellowship, an unexpected opportunity arose. Thomas Green contacted James about a potential collaboration between First National's new Sustainable Investment Division and the Collins Richardson Foundation. The bank wanted to establish a fund specifically for supporting small farming operations, transitioning to sustainable methods, exactly the kind of work James and Emma had been advocating. James hesitated, remembering Hayes's earlier offer and his own misgivings, but Emma's words echoed in his mind. "Make decisions without consulting me sometimes. I trust you completely." He agreed to meet with Green, making it clear he had no interest in returning to the bank full-time. The meeting was productive, with Green proposing terms that would allow James to guide the fund's investment strategy while maintaining his independence. "This isn't about bringing you back into the fold, Richardson," Green assured him. "It's about leveraging your expertise to help others follow the path you've pioneered. Hayes doesn't know I'm approaching you directly, by the way. This is my initiative." James considered carefully. "I'd want the fund to prioritize family farms and cooperatives, not just operations with the highest profit potential." "That's exactly why we need you," Green nodded. "Our analysts can identify financial viability, but we need someone who understands the human element, the community impact." James agreed to develop a proposal, working with Daniel to create a structure that aligned with their values while meeting the bank's requirements. When he presented the concept to Emma during their next video call, her smile was all the confirmation he needed. "This is perfect," she said, her face pixelated, but her enthusiasm crystal clear. "It's exactly what we talked about, creating systems that make sustainable farming financially viable for small producers." "You're not concerned about me working with the bank again?" James asked. Emma laughed. "James, I didn't marry you because you walked away from banking. I married you because you had the courage to redefine success on your own terms. This fund does that on an institutional scale." With Emma's blessing, James launched the initiative, which quickly gained attention in financial and agricultural circles. Farmers who had been skeptical of both bankers and academics began to see the Collins-Richardson approach as a practical middle path, financially sound while respecting agricultural traditions and innovation equally. As Emma's work took her to new countries, James divided his time between Meadowbrook Sunnyside operations and the growing network of supported farms. He traveled regularly to Washington, D.C. to advocate for policy changes that would benefit small agricultural producers, finding an unexpected talent for translating complex sustainability concepts into language policymakers could understand and support. 6 months into their separation, Hayes confronted James after a financial conference where James had presented the early results of the Sustainable Investment Fund. "Quite the performance," Hayes said, his tone somewhere between grudging respect and lingering resentment. "Though I notice your wife couldn't be bothered to attend your big moment." James regarded his former rival calmly. "Emma's implementing our irrigation system in drought-affected regions of Kenya this month. I'd say that's a worthy reason to miss a financial presentation." Hayes studied him carefully. "You've changed, Richardson. Time was, nothing mattered more to you than recognition in these circles." He gestured to the conference hall around them. "Priorities evolve," James replied simply, "and the long-distance marriage. How's that working out?" Hayes pressed, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. James smiled, genuine amusement, replacing his usual wariness around Hayes. "Better than anyone expected, including us. Turns out when you're building something worthwhile together, distance is just a logistical challenge, not an emotional one." For once, Hayes seemed at a loss for words. James took the opportunity to offer his hand. "The fund has room for more. Banking partners, Robert? If First National is serious about sustainable investment, we should talk." Hayes hesitated, then shook James's hand firmly. "I underestimated you, Richardson. Won't make that mistake again." As the first year of Emma's fellowship passed, the rhythm of their separated lives settled into a sustainable pattern. James traveled to meet Emma every 6 to 8 weeks, timing his visits to coincide with transitions between project sites. Between visits, they maintained their connection through daily calls, shared documents, and the synchronized watches that became a cherished link across continents. Meadowbrook Sunnyside flourished under shared management. Sarah Mitchell coordinated, with Emma on research initiatives while overseeing the day-to-day operations of the foundation. Joe and a team of now permanent employees managed the orchards, implementing new techniques Emma learned abroad while maintaining the traditional practices that gave their produce its distinctive quality. James found himself growing in unexpected ways. Without Emma's daily presence, he was forced to make decisions based on his own judgment rather than their usual collaborative process. Sometimes he succeeded brilliantly. Occasionally he failed and had to correct course. Each experience added to his confidence, not just as a businessman, but as a steward of their shared vision. During their scheduled video call on their first wedding anniversary, Emma seemed unusually excited, her eyes bright despite the poor connection from a remote area in northern India. "I have news," she said, her image freezing momentarily before resuming. "The Westridge Fund has asked me to extend my fellowship for an additional year, focusing specifically on implementing our water conservation system in arid climate zones." James felt a momentary flicker of disappointment. Another year of separation, quickly replaced by pride in her accomplishments. "That's incredible, Emma. They obviously recognize the value of your work." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "There's more. They've authorized funding for a co-researcher position. The role would involve coordinating between field sites and establishing implementation protocols." "Sounds like an ideal job for Sarah," James observed. Emma's smile widened. "Actually, I had someone else in mind. Someone with exceptional organizational skills, financial expertise, and a personal stake in the program's success." James stared at her pixelated image as understanding dawned. "Me? You want me to join you?" "For the second year of the fellowship, yes," Emma confirmed. "We'd still travel, but we'd do it together." The Westridge administrators were impressed by the Sustainable Investment Fund you established. They see potential for similar programs in the regions we'll be visiting. "But Meadowbrook Sunnyside," James began, "is in excellent hands." Emma finished for him, Sarah and Daniel have proven they can manage day-to-day operations. Joe knows the orchards better than either of us. And we'd return periodically to handle anything that requires our direct attention. James found himself speechless, his mind racing with possibilities. A year traveling the world with Emma, bringing their shared vision to communities in need while strengthening the foundation they'd built at home. This was always the dream, wasn't it? Emma continued softly. Not just creating sustainable systems, but sharing them. Not just building something for ourselves, but showing others how to build for themselves. Yes, James agreed, emotion, making his voice rough. That was always the dream. He cleared his throat. When would we start? I'd finish the current phase alone, about 3 more months. Then you'd join me in Morocco for the transition to year 2, Emma explained. It would give you time to prepare Meadowbrook Sunnyside and arrange for remote management of the investment fund. I'll start making arrangements tomorrow, James promised. Send me the details as soon as you have them. Emma's relief was visible even through the spotty connection. I was afraid you might have become too comfortable in your routines at home, James laughed. The man you married doesn't do comfortable routines, remember? He left those behind in his corner office at First National. The next 3 months passed in a flurry of preparation. James worked with Sarah, Daniel, and Joe to establish comprehensive management protocols for Meadowbrook Sunnyside during his absence. Victoria Richardson, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to oversee the estate's historic gardens and supervise the continued restoration of the main house. "Mother, are you sure?" James asked when she made the offer. "Overseeing construction crews and landscape teams is hardly your usual social circle." Victoria sniffed dismissively. "I've been managing contractors and service providers my entire adult life, Jameson. The only difference is that these wear work boots instead of livery. The Sustainable Investment Fund required more complex arrangements." James appointed Daniel as acting director, with quarterly review meetings to be conducted via video conference. Thomas Green committed First National's continued support, regardless of James's physical location. "The world is smaller than ever," Green noted during their final meeting before James's departure. "Your experience managing international implementation will only strengthen the fund's expertise." 2 weeks before his scheduled flight to Morocco, James received an unexpected visitor at Meadowbrook. Robert Hayes arrived without appointment, looking unusually subdued as he requested a few minutes of James's time. "I hear you're joining your wife in the field," Hayes said as they walked along the orchard rows, apple trees now heavy with summer fruit. "Quite a change from the corner office we both once coveted." "Life takes unexpected turns," James agreed cautiously. Hayes nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The Sustainable Investment Fund you established has been remarkably successful. The board is considering expanding it significantly in the coming year." "That's excellent news," James replied. "Daniel is well prepared to manage the expansion." "He is," Hayes acknowledged, "but the board and I feel the initiative would benefit from your continued direct involvement, even from abroad." James stopped walking, turning to face the former rival. "What exactly are you proposing, Robert?" Hayes met his gaze directly. "A formal partnership between First National and the Collins Richardson Foundation. The bank would provide capital and institutional support. Your foundation would provide expertise and implementation oversight. We'd establish regional investment centers in the areas where you and Emma will be working." It was a far more substantial proposition than James had anticipated. "This would require Emma's input as well. The foundation bears her family name." "Of course," Hayes agreed, "but I wanted to present the concept to you first as a gesture of..." He hesitated, seemingly uncomfortable with the sentiment. "Respect." James studied the man who had once been his fiercest competitor. "You've changed too, Robert." Hayes smiled ruefully. "Perhaps we all have. The sustainable investment models you've pioneered have proven more profitable than traditional approaches in certain sectors. It's hard to argue with results." "I'll discuss it with Emma and be in touch before I depart," James promised. Hayes nodded, apparently satisfied. As they returned to the main house, he commented, "You know, I always thought your move to farming was about the girl. I never considered it might actually be about the future." "It was about both," James replied honestly. "Sometimes the right person helps you see possibilities you couldn't imagine on your own." The evening before his departure, James stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the orchards in gold and amber. Though he would be returning periodically during the fellowship's second year, this moment felt significant, a conscious choice to leave behind the comfortable life he had established in Emma's absence to join her in the field, facing whatever challenges awaited them together. Sarah joined him, handing him a glass of Sunnyside's award-winning cider. "Having second thoughts?" James shook his head. "No, just appreciating what we've built here before I go help build elsewhere." Sarah studied him with the directness that had always characterized her friendship with Emma. "You know, when Emma first brought you home, I gave it 6 months tops. Figured you'd get bored playing farmer and head back to your penthouse and stock options." James smiled, accustomed to Sarah's bluntness, a reasonable assumption at the time. "I've never been happier to be wrong," Sarah admitted. "You two have created something special here, not just the business, but a model for how things could be different, better." "We've had help," James acknowledged, raising his glass in her direction. Sarah clinked her glass against his. "Two unexpected partnerships and new adventures," James added. His flight to Morocco the next day marked the beginning of a transformation neither he nor Emma could have anticipated when they first met at the farmers' market. For the next 9 months, James and Emma traveled together across North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Southeast Asia, implementing sustainable agricultural systems and establishing microfinance networks to support local farmers. The work was challenging, often frustrating, occasionally dangerous, but invariably rewarding. James discovered strengths he hadn't known he possessed: adaptability in unfamiliar cultures, patience with bureaucratic obstacles, resilience in the face of setbacks. Emma blossomed in the field, her practical knowledge and scientific expertise, earning respect from local agricultural leaders and international development officials alike. Together, they forged a working partnership as solid as their personal one, each complementing the other's skills. Emma provided the agricultural expertise and innovative techniques. James created the financial structures and institutional relationships that made implementation possible. The partnership with First National expanded beyond their initial expectations, with Hayes overseeing the establishment of regional investment centers that provided crucial financial support to local farming operations. What had begun as a small orchard in Willow Creek was becoming a global model for sustainable agricultural development. 3 months before the end of the fellowship's second year, Emma and James found themselves in a remote village in northern Thailand, celebrating the successful implementation of a water management system that had transformed the community's agricultural prospects. As they shared a simple meal with village elders, Emma received an urgent message from Sarah. "We need to return to Meadowbrook," she told James later that night in the modest guest house where they were staying. "There's a situation that requires our attention." James felt immediate concern. "Is everything all right? The orchards, the foundation?" "It's not that kind of emergency," Emma assured him. "Joe's daughter is getting married in 3 weeks. He's asked if we could possibly be there." The simple request touched James deeply. Joe, who had been skeptical of the city boy from the beginning, now considered him family enough to want his presence at his daughter's wedding. "We'll make it happen," James promised. "We're scheduled to visit the Malaysian site next week, but we could rearrange and head home directly after." Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It might be good timing anyway. There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, and it might be better to do it at home." James felt a flicker of alarm at her tone. "Is everything all right?" Emma smiled reassuringly. "Everything's fine. More than fine, actually. But it's a conversation about our future, and Meadowbrook seems like the right place to have it." The journey home was long, but filled with anticipation. As their car turned onto the gravel drive of Sunnyside Orchard, James felt a surge of emotion. The familiar crunch of stones, the scent of apple blossoms, the weathered sign welcoming visitors. All of it represented not just a physical place, but the foundation of the life he and Emma had built together. Sarah greeted them with warm hugs and immediate updates on operations. The orchards were thriving, with a record harvest expected in the fall. The Research Foundation had received new grant funding for climate adaptation studies. The Sustainable Investment Fund had expanded to 12 countries and was generating significant returns for both investors and participating farmers. "Basically, everything's going so well that you two should consider staying away permanently," Sarah teased as she helped carry their bags into the farmhouse. "We're clearly better managers than you are." "Clearly," Emma agreed with a laugh. "Though we might stick around just to keep an eye on things." After settling in and reconnecting with the core team, James and Emma took a long walk through the orchards, reacquainting themselves with the land that had brought them together. The trees were in full bloom, creating a canopy of pink and white, blossoms that drifted down around them like fragrant snow. "I've missed this," Emma admitted, running her hand along a familiar trunk. "As much as I love the work we're doing globally, there's something about this particular piece of earth that feels like an extension of myself." James nodded in understanding. "It's where we found each other, where we found ourselves, really." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small clearing where a single apple tree stood apart from the rest, an ancient varietal that Emma's parents had preserved as a living link to agricultural history. Below it, someone had placed a simple wooden bench, weathered but solid. "This is new," James observed as they sat down. "Joe made it," Emma explained. "He said the old tree deserved to have people sit and appreciate it properly." James smiled, imagining the gruff farmhand crafting the bench with the same care he brought to tending the orchards. "He's right." Emma took a deep breath, turning to face James directly. "This seems like the right place for our conversation about the future." James felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "I'm listening." "The fellowship ends in 3 months, Emma began. "We'll need to decide what comes next. The Westridge Fund has offered me a permanent position overseeing their international implementation program." She paused. "It would mean continuing to travel extensively, though not as constantly as we have been." James nodded thoughtfully. "It's a remarkable opportunity, and you've more than earned it. What are you thinking?" Emma studied him, her expression unreadable. "I'm thinking that while the work we've been doing is important, vital even, the past 2 years have shown me something equally significant about myself." She reached for his hand. "I miss having roots, James. I miss building something in one place, watching it grow season after season, year after year." James felt a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged lifting from his chest. "You want to come home." "I want us to come home," Emma corrected gently. "To continue the global work, yes, but from here, with Meadowbrook Sunnyside as our base. To implement what we've learned, to train others who can carry the methods to new regions." She hesitated, "and to start thinking about the next generation of Collins Richardsons, who might someday carry on this work. The implication of her words took a moment to register. When it did, James felt a surge of emotion so powerful that words temporarily failed him. Emma smiled at his expression. "I'm not pregnant yet, if that's what you're wondering, but I'd like us to start trying to build not just a sustainable agricultural system, but a sustainable family to steward it into the future." James pulled her close, overwhelmed by the rightness of her vision. "Emma Collins Richardson, you continue to show me possibilities I never imagined for myself." She laughed against his shoulder. "Is that a yes?" "It's an emphatic yes," James confirmed, pulling back to look into her eyes. "To coming home, to continuing our work from here, to starting a family. Yes, to all of it." They sat together under the ancient apple tree, planning their future as blossoms drifted down around them. The path ahead would have challenges, certainly, but they had proven their resilience both together and apart. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything since that first meeting at the farmer's market. As partners in the truest sense, growing something meaningful together. Joe's daughter's wedding took place in the restored gardens of Meadowbrook Estate, the historic mansion providing a stately backdrop to the joyful celebration. Victoria Richardson, now fully embracing her role as estate manager, had overseen every detail of the preparation with meticulous care. "The gardens have never looked more beautiful, Mother," James commented as they watched guests arriving. Victoria nodded in satisfaction. Emma's sustainable landscaping principles, combined with traditional design elements, have proven quite effective. "We've reduced water usage by 40% while actually expanding the flowering sections." James suppressed a smile at his mother's casual use of sustainability terminology that would have been foreign to her 2 years earlier. "You've become quite the environmental advocate." "Don't be ridiculous, Jameson," Victoria replied, though without her former sharpness. "I'm simply practical. Resources are finite and proper management is good stewardship. Your Emma helped me see that." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, Joe beaming with pride as he walked his daughter down the aisle created between rows of chairs on the lawn. Emma stood beside James, her hand in his, occasionally brushing away tears at particularly moving moments. During the reception, Hayes made an unexpected appearance, arriving with a gift for the bride and groom, and congratulations for Joe, whom he remembered from his visit to Meadowbrook 2 years earlier. "Richardson," he greeted James with a genuine smile. "Welcome home. The international implementation has been proceeding well in your absence." "So I hear," James replied, shaking his former rival's hand. "The regional centers are outperforming projections." Hayes nodded. "Your model works. The board is considering replicating it in other sectors." He glanced at Emma, who was chatting with Victoria nearby. "Will you be resuming direct oversight now that you're back?" "In a modified capacity," James explained. "Emma and I have decided to base ourselves here permanently with periodic travel as needed. We're establishing a training center at Meadowbrook for agricultural specialists who will implement the systems in new regions." Hayes considered this information. A franchise model for sustainable agriculture, impressive evolution of the concept. He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I understand congratulations may be in order on a more personal front as well." James raised an eyebrow, surprised by Hayes's reference to their family planning discussions, which they hadn't shared widely. "News travels fast in Oakridge Valley." Hayes chuckled. "Your mother mentioned to my mother that the east wing of Meadowbrook is being renovated into family quarters." "Mothers talk, Richardson. You should know that by now." The conversation was interrupted by Joe calling for everyone's attention. The bride and groom were preparing to depart, and traditional farewells were in order, as rice and flower petals Showered the happy couple, James found Emma beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Collins Richardson?" he murmured. Emma smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how far we've come since you showed up at my market stall in your ridiculous designer clothes." "They weren't ridiculous," James protested mildly. "They were appropriate for my position at the time." Emma hummed skeptically. "And now look at you, the renowned agricultural finance expert in practical khakis and work boots." James laughed, drawing her closer. "Life takes unexpected turns." "The best ones always do," Emma agreed. As the celebration continued around them, James reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had once measured success in financial statements and career advancement, viewing life as a linear progression toward predetermined goals. Emma had shown him a different metric, success as a cycle of growth, harvest, renewal, and legacy, seasons flowing into one another in a continuous, regenerative process. The wealthy banker and the farm girl had discovered something profound together. True fortune wasn't measured in bank accounts or land holdings, but in the ability to nurture growth, to adapt to changing conditions, and to build something that would sustain not just themselves, but generations to come. In the gardens of Meadowbrook Estate, surrounded by the fruits of their shared vision, James and Emma Richardson stood at the threshold of their next great adventure. Not as banker and farmer, not as investor and researcher, but as partners in the richest enterprise of all, a life built on authentic purpose, mutual respect, and enduring love. 6 months after their return to Meadowbrook Sunnyside, the Collins Richardson Sustainable Agriculture Center officially opened its doors. The renovated outbuildings of Meadowbrook Estate now housed classroom spaces, demonstration areas, and research facilities where agricultural specialists from around the world could learn the methods Emma and James had developed and implemented globally. The first class of 20 fellows represented 12 countries across 5 continents, each selected for their commitment to returning to their communities to implement sustainable farming practices. Emma developed the technical curriculum, while James created companion financial literacy and business development modules to ensure the environmental innovations would be economically viable. Victoria Richardson, to everyone's continuing amazement, took charge of the fellows' cultural experience, arranging for them to participate in local events and traditions during their 6-month residency. Her extensive social connections, once devoted exclusively to advancing James's banking career, now served to integrate international visitors into the community and showcase the economic benefits of sustainable agriculture to influential figures. "Your mother has become the program's most effective ambassador," Emma commented one evening as they reviewed applications for the next class of fellows. "The governor's visit next month was entirely her doing." James smiled, still occasionally startled by his mother's transformation. "She's found her calling as the grande dame of sustainable agriculture. Who would have thought?" "People surprise you when given the chance," Emma replied. "Speaking of surprises," she slid a folder across the table to James. "I received some interesting information today." James opened the folder to find financial projections for a substantial expansion of their operation. The plans included acquiring adjacent properties, establishing a processing facility for value-added products, and creating an agricultural tourism center showcasing sustainable farming methods. "This is ambitious," he observed, quickly calculating. "The investment required. The foundation has the resources, but the timing is aggressive." Emma smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "Turn to the last page." James flipped to the final document, a medical report with Emma's name at the top. His eyes widened as he absorbed the information it contained. "You're pregnant," he whispered, looking up at her with wonder. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. 12 weeks. The doctor says everything looks perfect. James moved around the table to pull her into a careful embrace, his heart so full he could barely speak. When did you find out? 3 weeks ago, Emma admitted. I wanted to be sure before I told you, and I wanted to have the expansion plans ready. James pulled back slightly confused. The expansion plans? If we're going to leave a true legacy for our child, Emma explained, resting a hand on her still flat stomach, we need to think bigger. The training center is just the beginning. I want to create something that will provide not just for our family, but for this entire community, a model that can be replicated anywhere in the world. James marveled once again at the scope of Emma's vision, where he might have been thinking of college funds and family security. She was envisioning a multi-generational enterprise that would serve as both livelihood and purpose for their child and beyond. You're extraordinary, he said simply. Emma smiled, leaning into his embrace. We're extraordinary together. That's the point. The news of Emma's pregnancy spread quickly through their close circle, with Sarah being the first to offer congratulations and practical support. Daniel sent a case of non-alcoholic sparkling cider from a sustainable vineyard the investment fund had recently backed. Joe presented them with a handcrafted cradle made from apple wood harvested during the restoration of the Meadowbrook orchards. Hayes sent a surprising gift, a trust fund established in the unborn child's name, with the stipulation that the proceeds be used for educational purposes related to sustainable development. The accompanying note read simply, "For the next generation of innovation. Congratulations, R.H." As Emma's pregnancy progressed, they worked together to implement the expansion plans while preparing for their child's arrival. The East Wing of Meadowbrook Mansion was transformed into comfortable family quarters, blending historical features with modern convenience. A nursery took shape, its walls painted with murals of orchard scenes and its windows overlooking the gardens Victoria tended with increasing expertise. Through it all, James found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The wealthy banker who had once measured his worth in promotions and profit margins now found his greatest satisfaction in creating systems that benefited others. The farm girl who had hidden her financial resources to protect her authenticity now wielded her influence openly to advance the cause of sustainable agriculture. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a thriving enterprise that honored tradition while embracing innovation, that generated profit while prioritizing purpose, that stood as living proof that true wealth came from what you grew rather than what you possessed. On a crisp autumn morning, with the orchards heavy with ripening fruit, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor Sarah Richardson, honoring both Emma's mother and their steadfast friend. The child had James's thoughtful eyes and Emma's determined chin, a perfect blend of her parents in both appearance and temperament. When Eleanor was 2 weeks old, they bundled her carefully and took her for her first walk through the orchards. The season's final harvest was underway, with workers carefully picking the late ripening varieties that would be stored through winter. Joe supervised from his new position as orchard manager emeritus, calling instructions from a comfortable chair position to overlook the activity. "Bringing the little boss for inspection," he called as they approached with the baby. Emma smiled, adjusting the blanket around Eleanor's tiny face. "We thought she should see the operation she'll inherit someday." Joe peered at the sleeping infant with uncharacteristic softness. "She's got time to learn. You two built something that'll last." James felt the truth of those words settle deep in his chest as he looked out over the thriving orchards, the restored mansion, the bustling activity of the training center, where the next generation of agricultural innovators was learning to carry sustainable practices to new communities. What had begun as a chance meeting between a banker and a farm girl had grown into an enterprise that would continue bearing fruit long after they were gone. "Yes," he agreed, his arm around Emma's shoulders as she cradled their daughter. "We certainly did." In the years that followed, Meadowbrook Sunnyside expanded its operations across the region, creating a network of sustainable farming communities that supported one another through shared resources, knowledge, and market access. The Collins Richardson model became a case study in agricultural programs worldwide, and the training center welcomed hundreds of fellows who returned to their home countries to implement what they had learned. Eleanor grew into a curious, capable child who moved with equal confidence through the orchards and the boardrooms, where her parents continued to forge innovative partnerships between agricultural producers and financial institutions. By the time she was 10, she had already developed her own theories about apple breeding and irrigation efficiency, jotting observations in journals reminiscent of her grandmother's research notes. James and Emma nurtured their daughter's interests without pressure, allowing her to find her own path just as they had found theirs. Whether Eleanor eventually chose to continue their work or pursue an entirely different dream, they were creating a legacy of purpose and possibility that would endure regardless. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting at the farmers market, James and Emma returned to Riverview Park, now transformed into a showcase for sustainable urban agriculture thanks to a Collins Richardson Foundation grant. They sat on a bench overlooking raised garden beds where city residents grew vegetables using water conservation techniques developed in North African deserts. "Did you ever imagine this is where that first apple would lead?" Emma asked, leaning against James's shoulder. James smiled, thinking of the skeptical banker who had accepted that Honeycrisp apple so reluctantly. "Not in my wildest projections." "And yet here we are," Emma mused, watching Eleanor examine a butterfly garden with scientific intensity, already showing signs of becoming the researcher her grandparents had been. "Here we are," James agreed, his fingers finding Emma's in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, growing something extraordinary, together. The banker and the farm girl had discovered the greatest fortune of all, not in what they accumulated, but in what they cultivated. Their true wealth lay in the orchards that renewed themselves each season, in the knowledge they shared freely with others, in the daughter who represented the perfect grafting of their strengths, and in the love that continued to flourish between them, as hardy and enduring as the ancient apple tree under which they had pledged their future together. In the end, the wealthiest banker and the poorest farm girl had both been transformed by something more valuable than money or land. They had found purpose in partnership, abundance in authenticity, and riches beyond measure in the simple, profound truth that the most fertile ground for growth is a life shared in equal measure, season after season, harvest after harvest, heart to heart. 15 years had passed since James and Emma first met at the farmers' market. Their daughter, Eleanor, now 14, possessed her mother's auburn hair and her father's analytical mind, along with a fierce independence that was entirely her own. The Collins Richardson agricultural empire had grown far beyond Meadowbrook Sunnyside, with affiliated operations in 27 countries and a training program that had produced over 500 graduates implementing sustainable methods worldwide. On a warm September afternoon, James sat in his office at the Sustainable Agriculture Center, reviewing applications for the upcoming fellowship session. The center had expanded 3 times since its founding, now occupying most of the eastern portion of the Meadowbrook estate grounds. Through the open window, he could hear the familiar sounds of the orchard at harvest time, tractors rumbling down rows, workers calling to one another, crates being loaded onto trucks bound for markets and processing facilities. His concentration was broken by a knock at the door. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, a tablet computer clutched in her hands. "Dad, do you have a minute?" she asked, her expression serious in a way that reminded James powerfully of Emma during business negotiations. "For you, always," he replied, setting aside the applications. "How was school?" Eleanor dropped into the chair across from his desk with teenage casualness. "Fine, but that's not what I want to talk about." She placed her tablet on the desk and slid it toward him. "I've been working on something." James looked down at the screen to find a detailed business plan titled Next Generation Agriculture, Vertical Farming Initiative. He raised an eyebrow, both surprised and impressed by the professional presentation. "This looks comprehensive." "It is," Eleanor confirmed with quiet confidence. "I've been researching vertical farming technologies for my science project, but I realize there's a real opportunity here for the foundation." She leaned forward, enthusiasm breaking through her composure. "We're doing amazing work with traditional field cultivation, but urban food deserts are still a massive problem. Vertical farming could allow sustainable production in areas with minimal land availability." James scrolled through the document, noting the thorough market analysis, implementation timeline, and financial projections. "You've put a lot of thought into this." "I've been working on it for 6 months, Eleanor admitted. "Mom's been helping me with the agricultural science aspects, but I wanted the business plan to be my own work before I showed it to you." The revelation that Emma had known about this project without mentioning it didn't surprise James. His wife had always been careful to let their daughter chart her own course, offering guidance without direction. "This is impressive work, Ellie," James said sincerely. "The financial modeling is particularly well done." Eleanor tried to hide her pleasure at the compliment. "So, what do you think? Could the foundation consider it as a pilot program?" James considered the question carefully. It would represent a significant shift from our current focus. The board would need to evaluate it thoroughly. "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "But that's what you and Mom always talk about, right? Adaptation and evolution. The agricultural methods that work today might not be sufficient tomorrow." James smiled at hearing their own philosophy reflected back at them. "You make a compelling argument. Why don't you present this at the next board meeting, 2 weeks from Thursday?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "Really? You want me to present to the board?" "It's your proposal," James pointed out. "Who better to advocate for it?" As Eleanor left his office, excited but already planning refinements to her presentation, James felt a familiar presence in the doorway. Emma leaned against the frame, watching their daughter hurry down the hall with evident pride. "So she finally showed you the vertical farming proposal," Emma said, entering the office and closing the door. "What did you think?" "I think our daughter is terrifyingly competent for 14, James replied, with a mixture of pride and amusement. The financial projections were more sophisticated than some I saw at First National. Emma laughed, settling into the chair Eleanor had vacated. "She's been obsessed with this project. Stays up late, reading research papers, corresponds with urban agriculture experts around the world. I think we've created a monster." "We've created exactly what we hoped for," James corrected gently. "A child who sees possibilities and has the confidence to pursue them." Emma's expression softened. "She reminds me of you sometimes. That focused intensity when she's working on something that matters to her. She has your vision, James, countered, and your determination." "Poor kid," Emma laughed, "cursed with both our stubborn streaks." Their comfortable banter was interrupted by Sarah Mitchell bursting into the office without knocking, her expression unusually serious. As the executive director of the James Richardson Foundation, Sarah rarely appeared rattled, having developed a calm competence over the years that matched her early fire. "We have a situation," she announced without preamble. "Cumberland Development Group is back, and they're making moves on the Wilson property." James and Emma exchanged concerned glances. The Wilson farm bordered Meadowbrook Sunnyside to the east, one of the few remaining independent agricultural operations in the area that hadn't joined their cooperative network. Old Mr. Wilson had rebuffed their offers of partnership for years, preferring to maintain his traditional and increasingly unprofitable farming methods. "What kind of moves?" Emma asked, immediately focused. Sarah handed over a document. "Tax records show they've placed a lien on the property for unpaid loans. Wilson mortgaged the farm 3 years ago and has fallen behind on payments. Cumberland is positioning to foreclose and develop the land for a luxury housing community." James studied the paperwork, his former banker's eye quickly assessing the situation. "They're moving fast. The foreclosure hearing is scheduled for next month." "That's not all," Sarah continued grimly. "They've applied for rezoning of the entire eastern corridor, including parts of our original Sunnyside property. If approved, it would impact our water rights significantly." Emma stood, pacing the office as she processed this threat to their operations. "This is clearly strategic. Robert Hayes may have become an ally, but Cumberland never forgave us for outbidding them on Meadowbrook." "It's been 15 years, James pointed out. "This seems like an excessive grudge." "It's not about the grudge," Emma replied, her mind working through the implications. "It's about land values. Oakridge Valley has become one of the most desirable areas in the region, partly due to our success in preserving its agricultural character while creating economic vitality. Cumberland sees an opportunity to capitalize on the environment we've created by building luxury properties within it." James nodded, understanding the irony. Their efforts to make sustainable agriculture economically viable had increased the region's appeal, making the land more valuable for purposes that would ultimately destroy that very appeal. "What do we know about Wilson's situation?" he asked Sarah. "He's 87, stubbornly independent, and refuses to discuss his financial troubles with anyone," Sarah replied. "His grandchildren have tried to intervene, but he's pushed them away. The bank, not First National, thankfully, is proceeding with the foreclosure." Emma stopped pacing, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "We need to talk to him directly, not about buying his property, but about helping him save it." "He's rejected our overtures for years," Sarah reminded her. "What makes you think he'll listen now?" "Because this time, we're not asking him to change," Emma explained. "We're offering to help him preserve what matters to him." The next morning, James and Emma drove the familiar roads to the Wilson farm, a once prosperous operation now showing clear signs of decline. Fences needed repair, equipment sat rusting in yards, and the field showed evidence of decreasing yields. Harold Wilson met them on his porch, his weathered face set in suspicious lines. He leaned heavily on a walking stick, but his posture remained proud, a farmer to his core despite his advancing years. "Figured you'd show up once you heard about the foreclosure," he greeted them without preliminaries. "Come to pick over the bones before they're cold." "Actually, Mr. Wilson, we've come to discuss how you might keep your farm," Emma replied calmly, unperturbed by his hostility. Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Bit late for that. Bank's made up its mind." "Banks can change their minds when the financial situation changes," James noted, drawing on his years of experience. "May we come in? This conversation would be better had sitting down." After a moment's hesitation, Wilson stepped back, allowing them into his home. The interior of the farmhouse reflected the same proud history and recent struggles as the external property. Quality furnishings worn by time, family photographs covering walls, evidence of a once prosperous operation now surviving on diminishing returns. They settled in Wilson's kitchen, where Emma accepted his offer of coffee, while James declined, remembering from banking days that accepting refreshments could be seen as a tactic to create false intimacy. "We're not here to buy your property," Emma began once they were seated. "We respect that this land has been in your family for generations, and we believe it should stay that way." Wilson studied her with narrowed eyes. "Then what exactly are you proposing?" "A heritage partnership," Emma explained. "The Collins Richardson Foundation would provide financial support to clear your debt and modernize your operations. In exchange, you would grant a conservation easement, ensuring the land remains in agricultural use in perpetuity." "You'd still own the property," James added. "Still make all farming decisions. But you'd have access to our resources, equipment, expertise, distribution networks." Wilson's expression remained skeptical. "And when I'm gone, what happens then?" "The easement would transfer with the property," Emma explained. "Your heirs would inherit the land with the same protections and benefits. They could continue farming or lease the operations to the foundation while maintaining ownership." "Why would you do this?" Wilson demanded. "What's your angle?" James met the older man's gaze directly. "Cumberland Development isn't just after your property, Mr. Wilson. They're attempting to rezone the entire eastern corridor. If they succeed, it would impact water rights throughout the valley, including our operations." "So you need me," Wilson concluded. "We need each other," Emma corrected gently. "Your farm is part of this valley's agricultural heritage. Once it's gone, it can never be recovered. Cumberland is counting on acquiring your property to establish precedent for the rezoning." Wilson remained silent, considering their words. Finally, he rose with some difficulty and retrieved a folder from a nearby desk. "My grandchildren have been after me to do something about this situation. They sent these papers last month." He handed the folder to James, who opened it to find legal documents establishing a family trust for the Wilson property. "They've set up the framework for a trust, but it hasn't been executed." "Don't see the point," Wilson admitted gruffly. "Trust can't pay off the bank. Just legally complicated way to lose the farm." "Actually," James said slowly, reviewing the documents, "this trust structure could work perfectly with our proposal. It would provide additional tax benefits and ensure multi-generational protection." For the first time, Wilson's expression showed interest rather than suspicion. "You're saying we could use these papers my grandkids sent?" "With some modifications. To incorporate the conservation easement, yes," James confirmed. "Have you discussed your situation with them directly?" Wilson's face clouded. "They wanted me to sell 5 years ago when prices were high. Said I was being stubborn, holding on to the past. Haven't spoken much since." Emma leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Wilson, holding on to your land doesn't have to mean struggling alone. Your grandchildren clearly care about preserving your legacy, even if you've disagreed about methods. The foundation can help mediate those conversations," James offered. "We've worked with many families navigating these transitions." Wilson stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "Cumberland offered $7 million, he finally said. "Enough to pay off the bank and leave something for the grandkids." "But not enough to replace what would be lost," Emma pointed out. "Some things can't be valued in dollars. Your family's history here, the knowledge passed through generations, the connection to this specific piece of land. We're not asking you to donate your property or sacrifice your family's financial security," James added. "The Heritage Partnership would clear your debt and provide ongoing revenue while preserving ownership and agricultural use." Wilson stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked fields his family had tended for generations. "My grandfather cleared this land by hand. My father survived the Depression without selling a single acre. I always thought my son would continue that tradition." His voice caught slightly. Cancer took him 10 years ago. Grandkids all have city jobs, city lives. The nature of farming is changing, Emma acknowledged, joining him at the window. But that doesn't mean your family's connection to this land has to end. The Heritage Partnership creates a bridge between traditional ownership and modern agricultural realities. Wilson turned to face them, his weathered features showing the weight of his decision. I need to talk to my grandchildren. They should be part of this conversation. Of course, James agreed, relieved at this opening. We can arrange a meeting whenever they're available. And as they prepared to leave, Wilson stopped them at the door. You two aren't what I expected, he admitted. Thought you were just rich folks playing at farming all those years ago. Emma smiled. We've heard that before. Been watching what you've built, Wilson continued grudgingly. Don't agree with all your methods, but can't argue with the results. Valley's still growing food instead of just houses. That counts for something. The meeting with Wilson's grandchildren took place the following weekend at Meadowbrook's main house. Victoria Richardson, now in her 70s but still elegant and formidable, had insisted on hosting, treating the occasion with the diplomatic gravity she brought to all foundation matters. The three Wilson grandchildren arrived together. Michael, an architect from Chicago, Jennifer, a teacher from Boston, and David, a software engineer from Seattle. All in their 30s, they exhibited the same mixture of stubbornness and practicality that characterized their grandfather, though expressed through urban sensibilities rather than rural traditions. Harold Wilson arrived separately, driven by Joe's son, who now managed the day-to-day operations of the original Sunnyside orchards. The old farmer looked uncomfortable in his Sunday best, but held himself with dignity as Victoria welcomed him with the same respect she accorded visiting dignitaries. James and Emma had prepared carefully for this meeting, developing detailed projections for the Heritage Partnership and conservation easement. Sarah and Daniel attended as well, ready to address specific legal and operational questions. Once everyone was settled in Meadowbrook's restored library, James opened the discussion. Thank you all for coming today. We're here to discuss options for preserving the Wilson farm while addressing the immediate financial concerns. Michael Wilson, the oldest grandchild, spoke first. Let's be clear about those concerns. Grandfather owes $4 million to Oakridge Regional Bank, with foreclosure proceedings already initiated. Cumberland Development has offered to purchase the property for $7 million, which would clear the debt and provide substantial inheritance for the family. Those are the financial facts, Emma acknowledged, but there are other considerations beyond the numbers. With all due respect, Ms. Collins Richardson, Jennifer Wilson interjected, this isn't your family's legacy at stake. We've been trying to address this situation for years, while grandfather refused to discuss options until crisis point. Harold Wilson shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent, his eyes fixed on his grandchildren. You're absolutely right, Emma agreed, surprising Jennifer with her candor. This is your family's decision, not ours. We're here only to present an alternative that might align both the financial needs and the heritage values at stake. Daniel distributed folders containing the Heritage Partnership proposal, giving everyone time to review the details. The plan outlined how the Collins Richardson Foundation would establish a $3 million fund to clear the bank debt and provide operating capital in exchange for a permanent conservation easement. The Wilson family would retain ownership through the trust structure they had already begun to establish. David Wilson, the youngest grandchild, studied the documents with professional thoroughness. This conservation easement would significantly reduce the property's market value by restricting development rights. Yes, James confirmed. but it would also provide substantial tax benefits and ensure the land remains in agricultural use for generations to come. None of us are farmers, Michael pointed out bluntly. We have careers, families, lives elsewhere. What exactly would we be preserving for? Harold Wilson finally spoke, his voice stronger than it had been during their previous meeting. You'd be preserving your history, where you come from, who your people were. He looked around at his grandchildren with unexpected emotion. Maybe that doesn't matter to you. Maybe I did a poor job showing you why it should. The room fell silent as the grandchildren exchanged glances, clearly affected by their grandfather's words. It's not that it doesn't matter, Grandpa, Jennifer said gently. It's that we don't know how to honor that history while being practical about the present. None of us can run the farm the way you have. You wouldn't have to, Emma explained. The partnership includes operational support. The foundation would handle the agricultural management while your family maintains ownership and decision-making authority. And the revenue? David asked practically. After expenses, it would flow to the trust, James explained. The projections indicate approximately $300,000 annually once operations are modernized, which typically takes about 3 years. Michael leaned forward, suddenly more engaged. That's significantly less than the Cumberland offer up front, but substantial over time. And it keeps the farm in the family, Jennifer added thoughtfully. David was still reviewing the financials. These projections seem optimistic. What makes you confident the property can generate these returns? Experience, Emma replied simply. We've implemented similar partnerships with 12 properties in the valley over the past decade. All are meeting or exceeding these growth and patterns after the initial investment in sustainable infrastructure. The conversation continued for hours, delving into specifics of the trust structure, operational transitions, and family governance. Victoria orchestrated a lunch break, during which the Wilson family stepped outside for a private conference. When they returned, Harold Wilson spoke for the group. We want to proceed with your heritage partnership proposal with some conditions. He looked to his grandchildren, who nodded encouragingly. Michael, Jennifer, and David will serve as trust directors alongside me with equal voting rights on major decisions. And we want a right of first refusal if the Collins Richardson Foundation ever considers selling its interests in the partnership. Both reasonable conditions, James agreed, relief evident in his voice. We'll have the attorneys draft the revised agreement immediately. As the meeting concluded and handshakes were exchanged, Harold Wilson approached Emma privately. Your parents' orchard, he said, gesturing towards Sunnyside in the distance. That's where all this started? Emma nodded. A small operation with big dreams. Like mine once was, Wilson acknowledged. Different dreams, maybe, but same heart. He studied her face. You've changed this valley. Not sure I always liked the direction, but seeing it now... He glanced toward his grandchildren, animatedly discussing future possibilities with James and Daniel. Maybe change isn't always loss. Emma smiled, recognizing the profound concession from a man who had resisted their overtures for 15 years. The best changes preserve what matters while creating new possibilities, she offered. Your family's legacy deserves both. News of the Wilson Heritage Partnership spread quickly through Oakridge Valley's agricultural community. Cumberland, development responded with predictable aggression, accelerating their rezoning applications and filing legal challenges to the conservation easement. The conflict quickly escalated from a private property matter to a public referendum on the valley's future. They've requested an emergency hearing with the county zoning board, Sarah reported during an urgent strategy meeting at the Sustainable Agriculture Center. They're arguing that the agricultural designation is outdated given the region's growth patterns. They've been laying groundwork for this for years, Emma realized, reviewing documentation of Cumberland's property acquisitions throughout the county. The Wilson farm was just the final piece they needed. This isn't just about us anymore, James noted grimly. If Cumberland succeeds, it creates precedent that could affect agricultural regions statewide. The implications were clear. After 15 years of building a model for sustainable agricultural communities, they were facing a fundamental threat to everything they had created. The battle would extend far beyond the Wilson property, potentially reshaping land use policies that had protected farming operations for generations. Eleanor, who had insisted on attending the strategy meeting despite her parents' reservations about involving her in such a stressful situation, spoke up from the corner where she had been, quietly observing. "This is why my vertical farming initiative matters even more now," she pointed out. "If developers can challenge traditional agricultural land use, we need alternatives that aren't as vulnerable to rezoning pressure." The adults in the room paused, considering the teenager's perspective. Eleanor continued with increasing confidence. "Traditional farming requires specific land designations that developers can challenge. Vertical farming can operate in mixed-use zones, industrial areas, even commercial districts. It creates food production capacity that isn't dependent on large land parcels." James exchanged a look with Emma, both recognizing that their daughter had independently identified a strategic dimension they hadn't considered. "Eleanor's right," Emma acknowledged. "We need to fight this rezoning battle, but we also need to diversify our approaches to food security." The vertical farming initiative could proceed in parallel with our legal defense, James suggested. "It demonstrates our commitment to innovation while we protect traditional methods." Eleanor tried to hide her excitement at having her proposal taken seriously in this crisis context. "I can accelerate the implementation timeline," she offered, pulling up revised projections on her tablet. "The pilot facility could be operational within 8 months if we use the old processing building at Meadowbrook." "Let's do it," Emma decided. "Sarah, get the legal team working on the rezoning challenge. Daniel, we'll need financial projections for both the legal fight and Eleanor's initiative." She turned to their daughter. "Ellie, you'll present your revised proposal to the board tomorrow, instead of next week. We need to move quickly on multiple fronts." As the meeting dispersed with clear action items, James remained seated, watching Emma direct the response with the same decisive leadership she had shown throughout their partnership. Still capable of surprise after 15 years together, he marveled at how she had immediately recognized the value in their daughter's perspective, integrating it into their strategy without hesitation. Later that evening, as they walked through the Meadowbrook Gardens that Victoria had transformed into a showcase of sustainable landscaping, James voiced the thought that had been forming since the strategy meeting. "We should consider bringing Eleanor into a formal role with the foundation," he suggested. "Not just her vertical farming initiative, but broader involvement in our planning processes." Emma considered this thoughtfully. "She's only 14, James. She's a James Richardson," he countered with a smile. "Age seems increasingly irrelevant when measured against capability." Emma laughed softly. "You're not wrong, but I want her to have choices, not just inherit our path by default." "Of course," James agreed, "but pretending she isn't already deeply invested in this work doesn't serve anyone." The way she approached the Cumberland threat today, that wasn't a child's perspective. That was a stakeholder identifying a strategic opportunity. Emma nodded slowly. "You're right. And she'll need practical experience if she's going to lead eventually, whatever direction that leadership takes." She squeezed his hand. "Let's create a junior board position, meaningful involvement with appropriate boundaries." As they continued their evening walk, the familiar landscapes of Meadowbrook Estate spread before them, orchards transitioning to autumn colors, research facilities illuminated with late-working scientists, the historic mansion now serving as both home and heritage center. What had begun as a chance meeting between a banker and a farmer had grown into an enterprise that touched thousands of lives, reshaping agricultural practices across continents. Now they faced their greatest challenge yet, defending not just their own operations, but the fundamental principle that sustainable agriculture deserved protection in an increasingly development-focused world. With Cumberland Development's resources and political connections, the fight would be difficult, but difficult challenges had never deterred the Collins-Richardson partnership before. Standing together at the edge of the original Sunnyside orchard, watching the sunset paint the trees in gold and amber, James and Emma renewed the silent commitment they had made 15 years earlier. Whatever came next, they would face it, as they had faced everything since that first meeting at the farmers' market, as partners growing something meaningful together, season after season, challenge after challenge, building a legacy that would continue bearing fruit long after they were gone. The rezoning hearing was scheduled for early December, giving the Collins-Richardson team just 2 months to prepare their defense. They assembled a formidable coalition of agricultural stakeholders, environmental groups, and community organizations. Opposed to Cumberland's development plans, Victoria Richardson activated her extensive social network, organizing fundraisers and awareness campaigns that transformed what might have been a routine zoning matter into a regional cause célèbre. Eleanor threw herself into the vertical farming initiative with remarkable focus, working alongside researchers from the foundation to refine the design of the pilot facility. Her bedroom walls became covered with technical drawings and growth cycle projections, her school assignments completed efficiently to maximize time for what she clearly viewed as her real work. "You need to remember she's still a teenager," Emma gently reminded James one evening after their daughter had fallen asleep at the dining table over engineering specifications. This battle with Cumberland isn't her responsibility to solve. James carried their sleeping daughter to her bed, reminded of when she was much younger and would doze off during their evening walks through the orchards. "I know," he acknowledged when he returned, "but she's chosen to be part of this. That's something we have to respect." The morning of the rezoning hearing arrived with the first real frost of winter. The county administrative building's meeting room was filled beyond capacity, with community members spilling into the hallway. Cumberland Development had brought an impressive legal team, along with consultants prepared to testify about economic benefits and tax revenue projections from their proposed luxury community. The Wilson family sat together in the front row, Harold Wilson between his grandchildren, his weathered face set in stubborn determination. Behind them, farmers from throughout the valley who had benefited from Collins-Richardson partnerships over the years formed a visual testament to the impact of their sustainable agriculture model. Cumberland's presentation went first, sleek and persuasive. Their lead attorney, a woman whose designer suit and precise diction signaled metropolitan confidence, presented a vision of progress that would transform underutilized agricultural land into a vibrant community generating millions in tax revenue. The economic realities of modern agriculture make traditional farming increasingly unsustainable in high-value regions like Oakridge Valley, she argued smoothly. Our proposal represents the natural evolution of land use patterns we've seen throughout the country. Digital renderings showed attractive homes with manicured lawns, recreational facilities, and small patches of community gardens that were clearly meant to suggest agricultural heritage without actual working farms. The Cumberland representative emphasized job creation during construction and ongoing property tax benefits that could fund schools and infrastructure. When it was the Collins-Richardson team's turn, James approached the podium first. He had deliberately dressed not in his former banker's attire, but in the practical clothes he wore for orchard work, a visual reminder of the transformation that had defined his life. Members of the board, I stand before you wearing two hats. Today, he began, as a businessman who understands economic development and as a farmer who understands the irreplaceable value of agricultural land, he gestured toward the packed room. The people in this room aren't opposed to progress. We're opposed to sacrificing sustainable, multi-generational prosperity for short-term gain. James presented financial data demonstrating that the valley's agricultural operations collectively generated more stable economic activity than the proposed development would create after its initial construction phase. He showed employment figures, tax contributions, and the multiplier effect of agricultural dollars circulating through the local economy. Cumberland's proposal isn't progress, he concluded. It's the oldest story in development. Convert working. Land that benefits many into luxury assets that benefit few. Once that agricultural land is gone, it can never be recovered. Emma spoke next, focusing on the environmental and food security implications. With quiet authority born from years of field research across continents, she detailed the water resource, impacts of converting farmland to residential properties, and the increasing importance of local food production in a changing climate. The decisions you make today aren't just about zoning, she told the board members. They're about the kind of community Oakridge Valley will be 50 years from now. Will we be a place that preserved its agricultural heritage and adapted it for contemporary needs? Or will we be indistinguishable from any other suburb, having paved over the very qualities that made this valley special? Harold Wilson had insisted on speaking despite his family's concerns about the stress. He rose slowly, leaning on a cane, and made his way to the podium with dignity that commanded the room's attention. My grandfather cleared our land when this county was being settled, he began, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. My family has weathered depression, drought, and market crashes without selling a single acre. He looked directly at the Cumberland representatives. We've been offered millions for our property. Said no then, saying no now. Some things matter more than money. The zoning board members listened attentively as additional speakers presented perspectives on the rezoning application. Scientists from the Collins-Richardson Foundation detailed water resource impacts. Local business owners testified about the economic benefits of agricultural tourism. Teachers described educational programs hosted at Meadowbrook Sunnyside that connected children to food systems. Near the end of the scheduled testimony, Eleanor requested permission to speak. At 14, she was significantly younger than previous speakers, causing some murmurs of surprise from the Cumberland team. The board chair, after consulting with colleagues, granted her 3 minutes. Eleanor approached the podium with composure that belied her age, her tablet computer in hand. James and Emma exchanged a glance, both curious and slightly apprehensive about what their daughter planned to say. My name is Eleanor Richardson, she began, her voice clear and steady. I grew up on Meadowbrook Sunnyside orchards. I'm not here to talk about the past, though. I'm here to talk about the future. She connected her tablet to the room's projection system, displaying technical drawings of her vertical farming initiative. Agriculture isn't static. It evolves like every industry. The choice isn't between traditional farms and development. It's between short-term thinking and long-term innovation. With remarkable clarity, Eleanor presented her vision for integrating traditional field cultivation with next-generation technologies, creating agricultural systems that could thrive even as climate and economic pressures intensified. Cumberland, argues that conventional agriculture can't compete with development values, she continued. They're solving yesterday's problem while ignoring tomorrow's opportunity. The future of food production will combine the wisdom of traditional farming with technological innovation. She concluded by addressing the board directly. You're not just deciding about zoning today. You're deciding whether Oakridge Valley will lead the next agricultural revolution or surrender its heritage for a housing development that could exist anywhere. I believe we should choose leadership. The room fell silent as Eleanor returned to her seat. Cumberland's representatives visibly recalibrating their strategy after being challenged by a 14-year-old with technical expertise they hadn't anticipated. After a brief recess, the zoning board reconvened to announce their decision. The chairwoman, a former county commissioner who had served the region for decades, spoke for the group. This board has carefully considered all testimony and documentation regarding Cumberland Development Group's application for rezoning, she began formally. We recognize the legitimate economic pressures on agricultural operations and the appeal of development opportunities. James reached for Emma's hand, both preparing for either outcome. However, the chairwoman continued, we find that the proposed rezoning would irreversibly alter the character and resource balance of Oakridge Valley in ways that contradict our comprehensive plan's core principles. Relief spread visibly through the James Richardson contingent as the chairwoman announced their unanimous decision to deny Cumberland's application. Furthermore, the board recommended that the county commission consider strengthening agricultural protection zones to prevent similar challenges in the future. As the meeting adjourned, Cumberland's legal team immediately huddled to discuss appeal options. James, Emma, and Eleanor accepted congratulations from supporters, including Harold Wilson, who approached with his grandchildren. Quite a speech from your daughter, the old farmer remarked to James and Emma. Got me thinking about what my own place might look like with some of those vertical growing setups alongside the traditional fields. Eleanor brightened immediately. We're building a pilot facility at Meadowbrook. You should come see the designs, Mr. Wilson. The systems are modular, so they can be adapted for different scales of operation. Eleanor enthusiastically explained technical details to the increasingly interested Wilson grandchildren. Harold shared a knowing look with James and Emma. That girl of yours is going to change things even more than you two did, he predicted. The Wilson Heritage Partnership became the first of many such arrangements throughout the region, creating a buffer zone of protected agricultural land around Meadowbrook Sunnyside. Cumberland Development eventually abandoned their legal challenges, recognizing that the community opposition they had generated made victory unlikely regardless of technical zoning arguments. Eleanor's vertical farming initiative proceeded with remarkable success. The pilot facility at Meadowbrook demonstrating production efficiencies that attracted attention from agricultural researchers worldwide. By her 16th birthday, she was directing a research team of graduate students and experienced engineers, her natural leadership abilities matching her technical understanding. One evening, as spring blossoms once again filled the orchards with fragrant promise, James and Emma sat on the porch of the original farmhouse, now maintained as both historical landmark and occasional retreat from the bustle of Meadowbrook's main operations. They watched Eleanor in the distance, walking with Victoria among newly planted trees, the grandmother and granddaughter deep in conversation despite their 60-year age difference. Do you ever wonder how differently things might have turned out? Emma asked, leaning against James's shoulder in a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. If you hadn't offered me that apple at the farmer's market, James smiled at the memory. Every day, we've created something extraordinary together, Emma mused, looking out over the property that had expanded from a single orchard to a network of interconnected agricultural operations spanning the valley. something neither of us could have built alone. James nodded, watching their daughter gesture animatedly as she explained something to Victoria. And now Eleanor's taking it places we never imagined. That's how it should be, Emma said softly. Each generation building on what came before, but finding their own path. As twilight settled over Meadowbrook Sunnyside, casting long shadows across land that would remain in agricultural use for generations to come, James reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The wealthy banker had discovered that true fortune lay not in accumulation, but in cultivation. The farm girl had revealed her own wealth of knowledge, vision, and purpose that transformed not just one man's life, but an entire community's future. Together, they had created something remarkable, a legacy measured not in bank accounts or property holdings, but in trees that would fruit for decades, in sustainable systems that would feed communities, in knowledge freely shared across continents, and in a daughter who would carry their work forward in ways they had only begun to imagine. The banker and the farm girl had both been wealthy all along, though in different currencies. Their partnership had created a new definition of prosperity, one measured in seasons and generations, in growth and renewal, in purpose fulfilled and wisdom passed forward. As stars appeared above the orchards they had tended together for 15 years, James and Emma Richardson sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching their greatest investment continue to grow before their eyes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.